Back when I was in high school, my best friend and I would basically hang out at school together because her dad was the warden of the local prison, and his house wasn't even a half a mile from it. Her mom was judgmental and, well, a bit hostile. It was the attitude more than anything that kept me from hanging out over at her house. She was a woman you didn't mess with. One day, my friend said her mother came home white as a ghost the night before because when she and her friends had come out of the grocery store, halfway to her car, they stopped and noticed someone in the back seat. She was thinking it was my friend, her daughter, but as she stepped closer, she saw that it was an elderly woman. Well, she started to go to the car, but her friend stopped her and said that she probably got off the bus from the assisted living center, and she had better call the police and let them handle it. Well, she did, and within minutes, because they were practically around the block, the police car pulled up and she pointed to her car. The officer walked up to the window and she watched as the officer snatched the door open and literally yanked the old woman out and pushed her up against the car and frisked her. My friend's mom was horrified until the officer pulled the wig off of her head. Or should I say, his head. Yes, it was not an elderly woman. It was a middle-aged man. This happened just yesterday, so it's fresh in my mind. I'm not quite sure what to think of it because it was just so bizarre and unbelievable. I might have just been sleep deprived. So last night at maybe 11 o'clock I was walking around my block. My town is relatively safe, so I didn't feel any danger. Plus it was a pretty night. I had been walking for around 5 minutes when a pale woman with blonde hair and a white dress caught my eye from across the street. She was about my height and looked to be around my age too. I didn't actually pay attention to her after I first noticed her. While I circled the block again, she was on the same street, a couple feet in front of me. She was standing on the curb staring at the cars passing by. It was a main road, so even that late people were still driving on it. I said hello to her, and she turned her gaze to me. I couldn't see her face super well, but from what I think I saw, she had no pupils or color in her eyes. She just stared at me. After a while, I asked if she was okay. She didn't respond again and simply pointed at the road. I was really confused and didn't understand. Right as a red car started coming down the road, she stepped into the road. The car slammed into her, and it was a bloody mess. The driver immediately stopped and jumped out. It was a man in his mid-20s. We both spoke about it, freaking out. He called the police and I went around the car to see the state of the girl. Once I circled around the car, she was gone. Not gone as in dead, gone as in she just wasn't there. The blood on the road was gone too, but not gone from his car. After the police arrived, they concluded that it was some big hoax of a kid who didn't know what they were talking about and some guy who went along with it. The blood on the truck was brought to investigation, only to be found as paint. Nothing else happened with it. I'm still not sure if what happened was real. It felt so real, but I don't believe in the paranormal. I don't know what it was, if it was just a dream or if it was real. I remember it like it was real. I feel like I can't leave the house now. I don't understand anything now, and I kind of feel like I'm going crazy. When I was 18, I was on my way to my friend's house for a party. We met up there, and then decided to go to the local Walmart for some beer and liquor. Between being the ages of 18 and 17, we all called our hookups and pooled money together. Eventually I got a hold of a guy and we met up with him at Wally World. Fast forward past the 20 or so minutes of the four of us waiting in the parking lot, and we are on our way back to town. I should mention that I come from a small town, and we don't have a Walmart or anything, so we all had to go one town over. So we are headed back when this big rain just sort of appears out of nowhere. It is incredibly intense rain, and I lose my friend's car pretty quick. I was able to find it, and I start following again. At first, the car was headed to my friend's house, and so I just kind of followed, absent-mindedly. But the car started turning down side streets and looping around neighborhoods, at one point passing their house entirely. At this point, I'm starting to get confused, but figure they are just messing with me in the most stupid way imaginable. I follow the car all throughout town, and eventually the car takes a sudden turn down a back road. I don't know how many of you live in rural areas or around rural areas, but I don't think I've seen country dark like this before. This was all made even creepier by a healthy fog that kicked up just after the rain ended. It was like a legitimate horror movie setting. Now I should mention that I have been on this road before. It was a popular road for teenagers to drift on, or take booze or smoke cruises. It was secluded with no houses around for miles and miles, just vacant, grazing lands. But it was literal miles away from my friend's house, and now I was getting mad. I called up my friend and asked her, "Hey, what do you think you're doing? Making me follow you all through town like this? This is bullshit, I'm wasting gas." Then she drops the bomb. They've been at the house for the past hour, and they were just about to go and look for me. That car that I was following wasn't them. I tell them I followed the wrong car back to town and turned down another road and headed to their house. Honestly, what scared me the most about this is that I had been following these random people. They were probably way more scared than I was, and if you're listening right now, I'm sorry for randomly following you all around town that night. Let me first preface this by saying that terrible things don't just happen in the movies, but in fact, they happen in everyday normal life. Most people are lucky enough to go through life without any major encounters. I had an experience that I would like to share to see what people think. Was I rational in my choices? Did I overreact? What would you have done? I think hearing responses will be therapeutic and perhaps help me get past the events of this story. Last year I attended college at a major university on the southeastern coast of the United States. I loved it so much, mainly because I didn't have to deal with snow or the cold weather. I basically had hot or warm weather every day, which was a huge change from the climate I grew up in. On this particular spring break from school, I decided to go home and visit my parents back in Maine. I decided that I was going to try to drive the over 20-hour drive straight through, perhaps stopping for brief naps or food along the way. At first, this seemed like an awesome idea. I could get there relatively quickly and spend most of my time at home rather than traveling. I spent most of the drive listening to music and catching up on some of my favorite podcasts. Unfortunately, the trip would take a terrible turn in Pennsylvania. I was driving through Pennsylvania shortly after midnight, and well, my eyes started to get a little heavy, and I was having a lot of trouble focusing on the road. And anybody who has driven through Pennsylvania knows that it's a hard drive, even when you have complete focus. It's always foggy and very mountainous, with many twists and turns. I decided that at the next rest area, I would pull over and at least rest my eyes for an hour or two, just to be safe. Well, I never made it to the rest area. I dozed off for a second, and I lost control of my car, and went right off the side of the road through a guardrail, and down to a small drop-off. Miraculously, I wasn't injured too badly, but my car was destroyed, and I was completely surrounded by trees, not sure how to get back up and onto the highway. Of course, it was pitch black outside, and the trees consumed the entire area. Blocking out most of the natural starlight, I tried to remain calm and ignore the terrible pain I was experiencing to try and call and get help. One problem: I couldn't find my phone. It was in my cup holder, but after the crash it was so dark I couldn't find it anywhere, inside or outside of my car. No luck. I didn't think I was injured badly as previously mentioned, but I wanted to use the flashlight on my phone to make sure I didn't have any major cuts or anything. I then decided my best course of action at this point would be to see if it was possible to climb back up the slight decline that my car had fallen off of. It seemed impossible in my condition, and with the limited visibility, it just wasn't a height that I could reach at the moment. And truth be told, I was lucky that I wasn't injured further after my car dropped down. Thankfully, the guardrail slowed my car down enough. Realizing that climbing, driving, or calling anybody wasn't an option, I began to yell and scream for help. But as you can imagine, it didn't work. I slouched to the side of my car and finally started to feel real emotion. I was scared and cold, and now the real fear finally started to make my eyes fill up with tears. I had no survival skills. What was I going to do until morning? Just sit in a ball in the fetal position? I decided that walking through the wooded area until I can find an area to climb where maybe there was a slight hill instead of the drop-off where my car was. Of course, now in hindsight, my best bet would probably have been to just stay put, because somebody in the morning would have noticed the accident and phoned it in. Maybe even someone passing by in the night and noticing the damage at the side of the road. As I grabbed some items from my car, I heard a noise. It sounded like ruffling of tree branches and footsteps. I hid on the other side of my car, paralyzed in fear. What kind of animals did they have in Pennsylvania? My first thought was a bear or something like that. Is that how it was going to end? Mauled by a bear. However, what actually presented itself in front of me was even more shocking. It was 3 men coming out of the trees. I couldn't make too much of it, but all 3 of them had huge beards, looking like their clothes were completely dirty and were carrying hunting rifles. I wasn't sure if to yell for help or to stay hidden from these men. For some crazy reason, my instincts were telling me to stay hidden, which seems like the exact opposite thing you should do in a situation like this. One guy who looked like the tallest of the 3 yelled out in a raspy, rugged voice, "Is anybody there?" They didn't have any flashlights or anything, so I decided to quietly sneak around the other side of my car and make a run for it into the woods. As I slowly and very quietly made my way around the car, I was wrestling with the idea in my head that these people probably just wanted to help, and I was probably putting myself in more danger by running into the woods. But the demeanor and possibility of getting shot was a chance that I did not want to take. I was about 5 feet cleared from the car when I started to sprint, and of course, in no time at all, I brought noise and attention to myself. The same man as before caught a glimpse of me as I ran into the woods and yelled, "Hey, get back here!" I swear I heard the loud boom of a gunshot. I didn't hear it hit a tree or anything. I just remember hearing a loud boom. I don't know what else it could have been. I was terrified. I heard them following me from what seemed like several directions. I heard one of them yelling something about private property or restricted land, or something of that nature. I just kept running and running for about an hour until I finally saw faint light shining through the trees. It was a road that looked like it led to a small town, or at least a few stores with lights. I walked into the gas station, feeling and looking bloody, battered, and bruised. The worker inside looked baffled and disgusted. I told him to please call the police. The police showed up in no time, and my parents were notified. They were going to drive down and pick me up as soon as they could. The police insisted that I go to a local hospital so my injuries could be assessed. When talking to the police, I told them everything about the 3 guys that came to the scene of the accident and chased me with weapons into the woods. The police said they would locate my car and take a look to see if they could find anything or anyone. My car was empty. Everything had been stolen out of it. Even some of the interior car parts had been removed. Nothing else really came from this incident. I didn't have any major injuries, and my insurance took care of the car. I now live back home with my parents and attend school locally. I try not to drive at night if I don't have to. I guess I have a phobia or something now. I'm thankful to be alive, and well, but still have anxiety and terrible thoughts pertaining to that night. I don't know what was more damaging to my psyche, having a major accident or being chased through the woods by 3 random guys. For some background, I am a gal from Kansas, and every summer since I was 12, I've gone backpacking in Colorado. I love to hike, and getting into the mountains is my favorite part of the year. Along with the beauty, however, every year I have a moment or two that makes me question coming back out into the wilderness. The summer I turned 15, however, has been the worst of them all. My day started the same, with my friends and I waking up late and putting our packs on to hike. This was going to be a fairly difficult day, as we were going up and over Georgia Pass on the Colorado Trail, which required some difficult elevation gain. At about noon, we had reached the top of the pass and knew we were in for some needed downhill. Our group decided to stop and make lunch before finishing up the day, seeing as we were all exhausted. As my group of about 11 fellow backpackers ate, we noticed 2 men sitting a little lower on the ridge. They were smoking weed, which wasn't uncommon in Colorado, but with my group, comprised of mostly teenagers, we were giggling and joking about asking them for some. However, our trail guides obviously weren't going to let that happen, so we sat and watched them smoke while we snacked. Now, I don't want to seem crazy, but at this point, all of the boys in my hiking group had gone exploring along this gorgeous mountain line, and the 2 men seemed to watch me and my 3 other girlfriends. I wasn't at all creeped out at first, but I did make eye contact at one point, and could tell they were both either in college or a little older. I didn't think much of it, and once the boys came back, we started down the mountain into the valley we would be camping in. The men were pretty far ahead of us, seeing as it took a while to get our big caravan moving. After about 45 minutes of hiking, we took a break. And this is when the first of many weird occurrences happened. I was leaning against the side of the trail, looking down into a thick forest of trees, when I noticed a bright orange hat, one that I had seen the smoking men wearing. I squinted a little and quickly turned away when I noticed it was indeed one of the men. He was staring right at me, and I asked one of my guy friends if he saw it too, just to make sure my bad vision wasn't deceiving me. It was the weirdest thing. The man was lying down on the steep hillside, staring back at us. The weirdest part was that he didn't have his other friend with him, which I thought was very odd, as the 2 seemed to be close when they were up on the ridge. I was weirded out but didn't say anything to my trail guides, seeing as I didn't want to be deemed as the overly paranoid girl. We kept trekking down the hill until we reached what seemed to be the ideal camping spot. There was a nice river, plenty of room for the 4 tents we occupied, and it wasn't far from the trail. The only downside was our neighbors, who seemed to be a somewhat large group of college boys. I thought maybe that this is where the weed guys were camping, and for some reason, the large group calmed my nerves. I guess it made me realize that the guys probably weren't hermit weirdos. Fast forward a few hours, and I headed down the trail to fill up my water. Now, normally I would do this with a friend, but almost everyone was taking a nap, and most people didn't want to walk anymore after our nearly 16-mile day. I wanted to be nice, so I grabbed about 4 or 5 extra Nalgene's and decided to do a full water run. The path to the river walked right by the college campsite. I made it to the river, filled up all the water bottles, and was about to stand up from my kneeling position when I saw the orange hat again. He was on the other side of the river and was once again staring at me. This weirded me out because this took place almost 4 hours after I saw him watching our group, and I thought there could be no way it took him 4 hours to hike an all-downhill, 6-mile section of the trail. Neither of us said anything, and I quickly began to walk back to my campsite and past the college boys. The man walked uncomfortably close to me, like he ran across the bridge and was within 5 feet of me. I am 4'11", so immediately wished I had taken someone else with me, but remained calm and picked up my pace. The man, unsurprisingly, turned into the college campsite. He did not seem to fit with them at all, but what freaked me out the most was that when I looked back, he was gesturing over to me with some sort of smirk. I tried to wave, a sort of peace offer, if you will, but was weighed down by my Nalgene's. Then one of the men, not Orange Hat, spoke. "You need some help, little miss?" he said in the creepiest tone I have ever heard. It was slow and patronizing and made my skin crawl a little, so I replied with a meek, "No thank you," and hurried back. I felt all of their eyes staring into my back while I speed walked. I told one of the guys on the trail with me what had happened, and he just brushed it off as me being paranoid over some college kids. Still, he told me he would walk by their campsite to get a good look at them, just to make me feel better. When he returned, he was wide-eyed, but wouldn't tell me what he saw or heard. This freaked me out even further, but I brushed it off as probably being some sort of locker room talk that my friend didn't feel comfortable repeating. Now skip ahead a little while. The sun had completely set, and after putting our food in bear cans, my tent mate and I walked around 100 or so meters to our tent. It's probably almost 10 p.m. at this point, and we were ready to go to sleep as soon as we could, but talked about the day and other typical high school girl topics. I told her about how I saw the weed dude in the orange hat at the river, and that he was part of the college campsite. She asked me if he was cute, and I told her that he seemed to be a total creep. She kind of reassured me and joked that he probably thought I was cute or something. This made me laugh, and I fell asleep quickly, tired from the day's work. But after we had been asleep for about an hour, I awoke to what sounded like footsteps. Through the walls of our tent, I could see a flashlight coming over from where the college site was. It's important to note that our tents were arranged in a diamond-ish shape, with about 30 feet between each tent. We did this because the boys tended to stay up later, and this helped to keep noise down a little for those that wanted to sleep, and keep conversations a little more private. This night, my tent was the point of the triangle furthest away from everyone else, and we pushed it even further away because of the noise from the guys in the tent next to us. This is key, because I know that this light and the heavy footsteps weren't coming from anyone in our group. I instantly felt my stomach drop and looked over to see that my tent mate, had noticed the noise and light too. At such a late hour in the middle of the woods, hearing footsteps coming toward you was not a good feeling. She whispered to me, "What the hell is that noise?" And fear shook her quiet voice. "I don't know, but it's freaking me out," I replied, hushing my voice even quieter. I grabbed a tent stake lying next to my sleeping bag and gripped it tightly. The noises got louder and louder until it was clear that someone or something was standing directly in front of our tent. My heart dropped as I heard the nylon crinkle on our rain tarp. At this point, my friend and I were paralyzed with fear, gripping each other's hands fiercely. I noticed that there was 100% more than just one light, and it seemed that whoever was out there was circling our tent, flashlights in hand. I heard hushed voices but couldn't make out anything, still gripping my tiny metal tent stake as tight as I could. I thought I heard our zipper sound off, when with the adrenaline coursing through my body, I slapped the side of my tent as hard as I could and gave a rough-sounding humph, my hand coming in contact with what felt like a human leg, but quickly the chorus of footsteps moved away from our tent. My friend and I were terrified and watched wide-eyed as the lights grew more and more distant. Neither of us slept at all the rest of the night, whispering about whether or not we should get our guides. Thankfully, the noises and the light didn't come back, and I fell asleep from boredom, though I was still scared out of my mind. In the morning, my stake still in hand, I went out to see if I could find any footprints. To my horror, there was a mass of boot prints in the loose dirt, and they became scattered from the other direction. What scared me the most was that the tree directly in front of my tent read, "Hello," marked into the wood with a knife. My heart sank again, and I looked over to the other campsite. Though it was barely 7 in the morning, the college kids had moved on and left behind only the knife-carved message. Maybe they were just some boys trying to flirt with us or scare a couple of high school girls. But either way, the fact that they brought a knife over to our tent scares me greatly. I am still terrified to this day about what those boys could have done had I not slapped one of their legs, and what could have happened if we hadn't woken up and been aware of the situation. Something just tells me they weren't with the best intentions. I worked in a toy shop for a couple of years, and as you can imagine, Christmas was a pretty intense time for all of us who worked the holiday shifts. It was impossible to get that job without being an intensely enthusiastic, happy, smiley kind of person. Like 80% of the staff were entertainers or had come from some kind of performance background, and we were living the dream, so to speak. We were actually getting paid to play with toys, joke with kids, and above all, Christmas was the best time of the year for that. A toy shop at Christmas time has such a magical feeling about it, especially if all of the staff have Christmas spirit about them. Now, our store was hugely into Christmas, to the point where our smart casual uniforms even had Assistants to Santa Claus, or Santa's Little Helpers, or other variations written in big writing over the back. This, of course, led to some fantastic interactions with kids, asking about if we had met them and things like that. Being the only staff member who had actually worked with children for years, these questions were normally sent my way to be answered, because I always had one ready. So that's the backstory out of the way. One weekday, at an oddly quiet moment, I was on my own on the shop floor while the other staff members restocked after the afternoon rush. A boy comes in, unaccompanied, must have been about 9 or 10, smiles briefly at me, and then starts walking around. I give him a couple of minutes to take a look at things before asking him if he wants to play with this new air-powered rocket launcher that we had. No thanks. I know Santa. I don't need your help, he replies flatly. This was mildly unusual, but hey, he seemed to be a pretty sweet kid otherwise. Unfortunately, I don't know much in there that would have been good for a kid his age. I figure it'll probably be his dad or someone paying for it, so I start showing him some kind of limited stuff that would be suitable for some of the older kids. I show him a few things, and he sees something he likes. This big massage slipper. It's one big slipper that you put both feet into, and it has various massage settings. Not the kind of thing I'd have imagined him to pick out, but a fairly cool gift nonetheless. So he asks how much it is, and I tell him it's like $20 or whatever the price was. He then instantly looks angry and frustrated. Is that a bit too expensive, bud? I ask, keeping the tone friendly. I don't want this kid to be upset. And he nods. So I show him some other things, and he starts getting more and more difficult to deal with. He's frowning, breathing all heavy through his nose, like he's building up to some kind of temper tantrum. He starts telling me again how he knows Santa, how Santa gives toys away to good kids, and doesn't ask for money in return. I just calmly explain that I can't just give stuff away for free, and then politely leave him to browse the rest of the toys. A couple more minutes go by. I'm just sitting by the cash register reading a book since the store is so quiet. It's only me and the kid, with my manager up in the office. I remember looking up from my book, and the kid is at the register just staring up at me with this angry look on his face. Once again, I apologize and explain to the kid that as much as I'd like to, I can't just give stock away, otherwise I'll get fired. Your boss is mean, the kid says, seething with anger at this point. Now, this probably wasn't the best thing to do, but since the kid was so on the money with his little statement, my boss was indeed an asshole, I just laughed. Like not hysterically, just like this little involuntary giggle. The kid does not take this well. He thinks I'm laughing at him. Why are you laughing at me? He asks, practically shaking with rage. I begin to explain that I'm not actually laughing at him, but I soon realize it's not getting through to him. He just storms out of the store, disappearing among the crowds of middle-aged women that are clogging up the mall. As the afternoon draws on, the store gets a little busier, and I get to actually do some work. Like I said, the work was fun, so it was never a problem. Being busy meant the hours go quicker, which means I get to go home quicker. Win-win. So I make a few sales, get to test out some of the fancy new Nerf guns we had in store, and the weird kid eventually just slips from my mind. Nothing remotely eventful happens for the rest of the day, right up until closing time, when I'm starting to close the store down. Someone is standing at the register. I look up from my worksheet, and it's the kid. I give him a cheery enough greeting, hoping the kid's mood has improved. But it hasn't. Instead, it's gotten worse. You're mean too, he hisses. Look, I'm sorry, kid, but where are your parents? I ask, but the kid refuses to answer. He just glares at me again. Kid, where are your parents? I don't want to have to call mall security, but you can't be wandering around on your own, okay? He knows when you are sleeping, the kid mutters. I roll my eyes, but the way he says it has me really creeped out. He knows when you're awake. He knows when you've been really bad. Where are your parents, kid? I ask again, trying to remain calm. The North Pole. Very funny, but seriously, you gotta go. The store is closing. He's gonna climb down your chimney covered in soot, All while you're asleep," the kid said. I didn't say a word in reply. "He'll know when you're asleep, and he'll be able to creep right up next to your bed." I reached for the store's phone, dialing the mall security short number. I try not to listen to the kid, but I can't help but hear his words over the phone's dial tone. "He's gonna stuff your mouth with coal until you choke and die." I turn, ready to scream at this creepy little brat. It's one thing to be a spoiled kid. It's another to say such creepy, threatening things to someone who's only trying to help. But when I turn around, the kid is gone. Not a sign of him, even outside the store in the emptying mall. I've only told this story a handful of times, but it never fails to creep me out. The idea of a kid having such a skewed idea of Santa as some weird avenging angel, having such a warped view of the holiday season, never, ever fails to make my skin crawl. Back when it was originally released, I really wanted to get my hands on the new Xbox One. You know the one. It was 4K, ready with a considerably faster processor. So naturally, I tried absolutely everything in my power to get one as immediately as I could. My local Walmart was having one of those Black Friday sales, and like so many others, I stood patiently in line, waiting to try and beat the rush to grab one. But I was nowhere near sprightly or fortunate enough to actually get one that way. So after failing to get one in person, I then tried getting one online. But as rapidly as I wanted one to own, the users who were reselling them were asking way too much money, and I simply couldn't afford to shell out double or sometimes triple the price. After weeks of trying to find a way to get a hold of one, I had come to the conclusion that it just wasn't to be. It was then that I had something of a stroke of luck. Although I had resorted to Craigslist in my desperation, I did actually find someone that was selling their Xbox One at no more than the original buying price of the console. Naturally, I was skeptical as hell. For the life of me, I simply couldn't fathom why they would do something like that. But one thought overrode all others. If I didn't put in a bid now, someone else would, and I could kiss my chance at owning an Xbox One goodbye. I immediately emailed the seller and let them know that I was very interested. Not only that, but I had the cash on hand and ready to go. I also offered to pay for gas or whatever it would take to get the console delivered to my door. I figured that would be a pretty appealing offer to someone who I guessed was just strapped for cash around the holidays. I was stunned to get an almost instantaneous response, stating that they did still have the Xbox and were in fact still waiting for a proper bid from a serious buyer. They politely asked for a delivery address so they could bring it over as soon as possible. I was sort of hesitant to divulge such personal information and asked if it would be a better idea to first meet in public, since it was much safer that way. I'll be honest, I wasn't too pleased with the idea of a total stranger coming to my house, but he informed me that he was going to be very busy running holiday errands all day, and that there would only be some pretty specific windows of opportunity to drop it off. It would be much more convenient for him if he was able to come to my house. I was still not particularly ecstatic about the idea, but oh man, I really wanted that Xbox. So, in the end, I agreed and texted the dude my home address. I figured it was safer than me going over to his place. At least this way, I'd be on my home turf. I was so happy and eager to get my hands on that new console that excitement only grew as I began waiting for the guy to turn up. But he took his sweet goddamn time. I mean, hours and hours passed by before I began to suspect that he wasn't going to actually show up. Around 1 in the afternoon, 4 hours after he was due, I was seriously losing my cool, thinking it was a prank or something. I tried texting the guy back, asking him where he was. Previously, I had gotten pretty timely responses from the guy, but this time, I didn't hear a single thing from him. By 6 that evening, I just lost all hope. I assumed that he had gotten a better offer from someone else, and didn't have the heart to tell me that he'd picked a new buyer. I was disappointed, more than words can possibly describe. I had gotten myself so psyched, and I can't even tell you how deflated I was. It's one thing to not have gotten the item from the store. I could come to terms with that. But I was so close to having one in my hands. It sucked having my hopes dashed so cruelly like that. But that didn't mean I'd given up entirely. So, for the rest of the night, I kept looking around on Craigslist and other sites to find an Xbox One that was within my price range. But as I was getting ready to wind down for bed, I heard something. At first I dismissed it as the wind or something, that it was maybe just my imagination. But then, I heard it again. Someone was knocking, not at my front door, but lightly on the TV room window. I walked up to the bedroom window and peered out into the driveway, seeing this strange-looking dude at my front door, looking around as if checking if the coast was clear. I'm suspicious, but I go downstairs to see what he wants. He identified himself as the guy who had the Xbox, apologized for being so late, and explained that he had gotten backtracked with errands during his day. Then, he casually asked if I still had the money. I opened the door all the way, but still kept the screen door closed as a precaution. Something just didn't feel right. Like, at all. I told him that yeah, I still had the cash on me, but I didn't see that he had anything with him. So I calmly asked if he brought the Xbox with him, like if it's still in his car or something. As I expected, he told me it was out in his van. He told me to get the money and come out to the van with him, and he would get it for me. I let him know I wasn't really comfortable walking out to his van, but he seems to understand, and tells me that it was all good. I briefly look over the guy's shoulder and see that there is in fact someone else sitting there in the van. Not only that, but the dude at my door had been keeping his hands concealed in the little front pouch of his hoodie the whole time while talking to me. And there was definitely something more than just his hands in there. Don't ask me how I could tell. I just could. You know when you just get a gut feeling about something? Yeah, that. I tried to stay as chill as possible as I lied to him that I was just going to go fetch my wallet and return in a minute. His mood immediately changed as I closed the door in his face before locking it. I then make this split-second decision, better to be safe than sorry, so I pull my phone out of my shorts and dial 911. But as I do, I heard a loud thud on my front door. Then the sound of the van's engine revving before it zooms off into the night. When I went to check and see if he damaged my door, I nearly pissed my pants when I saw a rusty old hatchet buried in the wood. I was right that he had something in his sweatshirt, and that I shouldn't go out to the van with him. Be careful who you're buying from, folks. You never know who's behind the username.
So this actually happened to me this morning. I was dropping off my fiance at work around 5 a.m. On the way home, I noticed this car speeding towards me. Nothing really unusual about that, because I live on the countryside, and we have a lot of open roads, so people tend to drive fast in the mornings and late at nights. What was worrying was that he was just tailgating me and wouldn't overtake, even though there was plenty of space and time for him to do so, because it was a wide open road. He was literally inches away from the back of my car at one point, and I honestly thought that this crazy ass dude was going to hit me. I have front and back dash cams, which he would have had to see because they both have flashing red lights on them. I was getting closer to my house, and he was really close behind me at this point. I wasn't sure if he was following me or just mad at the world, so I take a different turn than I normally do, trying to get away from this dude, and he follows me. Perhaps a coincidence. I've never really used this road on the way home, and now I'm starting to panic. Why was he following me? Did he think I was someone else? I've had this car for a few months, so it couldn't be that. I get towards a roundabout, and he overtook me, then blocked off the exit, refusing to move. I had so many thoughts going through my head. I thought I was going to die because this stupid psycho had it out for me. This was all within 30 seconds of him stopping in front of me. I just sat there for a moment, like what the hell do I do? I wouldn't be able to turn around quickly, as the road was very narrow. Out of pure luck, he stalled his car, and I turned onto the wrong side of the road to get around the roundabout. I drove as fast as I could to the next roundabout and took a right turn, but I could still see his lights behind me, maybe 500 yards down the road. I saw a little road with a few offshoot turnings. I've taken my car down these little roads hundreds of times. I knew where each one goes. My heart was beating so hard I could hear it. I was shaking like crazy at this point. I heard a car heading towards my way, but it took a different turn. I waited a few minutes to make sure I could get out without him noticing me. I sped out and rang the police. I put them on loudspeaker and explained everything that had just happened within the last 30 minutes. They told me to take a breath and try to relax, and to drive to the nearest police station, which was about 6 miles from where I was. Soon as I get back on the road, there he was, right behind me, and had literally turned off his lights and snuck behind me. I'm crying on the phone to this woman, saying he's right there, and I was scared that he was going to hit me or something. I got to the police station, and he sped off screeching something at me down the road. I handed the police my memory card from the dash cams, and they sent 2 officers to follow me home. I put my car in the garage, then honestly sat there crying, furious at what just happened. I take my fiance to work 4 days a week, and I have to pick him up again in a few hours, and I'm terrified I'm going to see that car again. This is the first time I talked about this, besides to my mom when this happened, and to my friend. Anyway, I was in 6th grade, maybe 12 or 13. My friend Gabby made plans for a party at her house. She invited everyone that sat at our table during lunch. School ended, and I head home to change, and then walked to her house, which was 2 blocks away. I went to one of the food trucks that was outside my home. These food trucks sell soda, chips, and are basically corner stores on wheels, and they are very common in my area. I bought some sodas and then began my walk to her house. During my walk, I noticed this white pickup truck that had equipment in the bed which was sticking out. The truck also had scratches which stood out, seeing that the truck was white. It was just a creepy truck is what I'm trying to say. I see the driver looking at me, and I noticed that he slowed down as he passed me. When he was in my view, he gave me a creepy smile and waved to me. For some crazy reason, I thought it could be a family member, so I waved back awkwardly. He stopped waving, and somehow his smile grew wider. He turned the corner, and I continued walking. Not even a minute later, as I'm down the block, I see the same truck down the street and coming towards me. So I decided to run to a more open part of the street where there were always people around. I stopped by the corner of the block, and thank God there was another food truck there. Seeing how there's always a person in them, I just stayed by the truck. As I'm standing there, I turn to see the white truck parked by my side of the street, only a few feet away. The guy is looking at me and calling me over. I wanted to tell the lady from the food truck that this guy was following me, but as soon as I started talking to her, the truck drove away. What really freaks me out is that he followed me. The way the street works, for him to get back to find me, he had to go around a whole block, make a turn, and then get back to me. and he did this in under a minute, so he must have been speeding and very eager or something. I went to my friend's house and told her what happened. I called my mom, and she said that she would walk with me everywhere for a while. Luckily, I never saw this guy again. This story happened a year ago, when I was 15 on a school trip to San Fran. At the time, I was very immature, not in the sense that you normally would think, but in the sense that I didn't really know how the world worked, and how scary it could be. I attribute this story to me growing up and realizing how the world works. I was rooming with two other girls, both were a year older than me, so I didn't really know them well. The way the trip worked, so to say, was that breakfast in the hotel was between 7 and 8, but the chaperones on the trip wouldn't wake us up. So if we wanted to have time to get ready and eat before leaving to explore the city for the day, we had to do it on our own. This meant that in the morning, me and the people in my room didn't see the chaperones till we went down for breakfast, usually around 7:45, since we all took a long time to get ready. However, this day was different. We were all tired of arriving late and having to eat quickly, so we woke up a bit earlier to go down and get breakfast, right when it opened. We ate breakfast, and pretty much the rest of the kids on the trip and I headed to the elevators together. This was a mixed group of boys and girls, and my twin brother also happened to be on the trip. So the people in the elevator was him and his friends, me, the girls from my room, and a few of their friends. The elevator door almost closed when two Indian men stuck their hand through the door and stepped inside, squeezing themselves into an already packed elevator. They looked young, maybe 19 or 20. Eventually, we arrived to our floor and got off. So did the men. The way the hotel rooms and hallways were situated was essentially just a square. You could go either direction and eventually make it back to the elevator if you just turn left or right 3 times. The people on my trip went right, and the men went left. Eventually, my brother and his friends trickled off into their rooms, and it was just me and one of the other girls on the trip, because the other girl had went into one of the boys' rooms. We were right at our rooms when we encountered the men again. At first, we didn't notice anything wrong. They were probably just trying to find their room. I turned away from them and tried to find my room key in my wallet. Now, at this point, my immature brain didn't notice anything wrong, but my roommate did. I could see the panic in her eyes, and as I turned to look at the men, I realized they weren't looking for their room. They were looking for us. My heart began to race and we panicked, each fumbling for our cards to get in the room as quick as possible. But they were moving towards us too quickly. We were standing there, pressed against our door, as these two men stepped closer to us and got within a foot of our faces. Their English wasn't the best, so they slowly asked us what we were doing. I couldn't speak. I didn't know what to do in this situation, so my roommate spoke up. She tried her best not to let them know that this was our room, but it was pretty obvious at that point. She stuttered something about trying to get into her friend's room, but these men clearly weren't there just to know what she was doing. I could tell they were there for something more sinister. One of the men continued to stare at me and eye me up and down when the other one got really close to my roommate and asked her for her number. She stood up tall and quickly said, "No, I'm sorry, you cannot," but her voice trailed off as her confidence wore off. At last I spoke, explaining that we were underage and that we were on a school trip, and that we couldn't. They didn't take no for an answer. At that point, I slowly started to pull my room key from my wallet. Luckily, my friend pushed the card into my wallet and made me push my hand holding the wallet behind my back. At the time I was confused why she didn't want us to go into our room, but now I realized she had more intuition about these men than I did. She knew that if we opened the door with them right there, that they would force themselves in there with us, and who knows what would happen. Eventually they backed off far enough where we felt like we could escape from them. She grabbed my wrist and pulled me along the hallway, and we sprinted towards the elevator. Along the way we ran into my brother and one of his friends. We quickly explained to them what happened, and they sprinted with us to the elevators. Once we were there, quickly pressing the elevator's buttons to get downstairs where the chaperones were, we encountered the men again. I clutched onto my brother's arm, and my roommate did the same to my brother's friend. They just stood there on the other side of the hallway, staring at us, and quickly walking towards us. It looked like they were just pretending to be normal hotel patrons in front of the boys, but we knew what they really were. They were creepy and we weren't risking it. Finally, the elevator opened, and I don't think I've ever clicked the closed door button so fast. Right as the man got to the elevator, the door closed. Thank God. We thought our ordeal was over, but it wasn't. There were multiple elevators in the hotel. My brother, his friend, my roommate, and I had just got into the breakfast hall where most of our group and chaperones were when we realized the men were there too. They had followed us. They started off staying across the room from us, but were getting closer. We left the room and went back up to our rooms. Once there, my roommate and I were panicking. They knew where our room was. They knew our floor. They could find us at any time, and we didn't know what to do. Our panic was cut short as the phone rang. At this hotel, you could call other people's rooms, and we thought it was from one of the boys' rooms, playing a joke on us. We were wrong. When we picked up the phone, it was just heavy breathing and a quiet laughter. We hung up the phone after about 20 seconds. I called my brother and his friend and asked them if they could meet us outside the room. They walked us to the elevators and back downstairs. On the way, we told them about the phone call. My brother's friend took responsibility for it. My roommate believed him, but I didn't. I knew they wouldn't freak us out like that. They were trying to calm us down. Once downstairs again, still shaking, we told one of the chaperones about the two men, and they freaked out. We told the front desk about the men, but since we didn't know what room they were in, or their names, they told us there wasn't much they could do about it. They tried to reassure us that there was a group staying there that they were probably a part of, and that they were leaving in a few days. It didn't calm us down though. Thankfully we never saw them again, and I never want to. I used to work at one of those 24/7 Walmart supercenters. I was right out of high school, a 19-year-old female, and worked as a cashier for 2 terrible years where I was subjected to all kinds of abuse from customers and coworkers alike. I was screamed at, slammed into the register face first, groped, and even farted on once because this old lady was mad that the oranges were priced each and not by the pound. And I'm not even exaggerating. However, the time that sticks out in my head the most is the time that a customer tried to follow me home. I had just started my shift, and the second I got to the register, I had a line that was 10 people long. For some reason, the Walmart I worked at never had enough registers open, so people were usually really mad and impatient by the time they got to me. I get right to work and keep a smile plastered on my face while making many mandatory small talk. How do you do? How are you? Did you find everything? Most customers were polite, but not very interested in talking, so it was easy to fall into a bit of cashier robot mode. I get this guy who only had 2 items, yogurt and Band-Aids. I ring him up in a record time and neatly bag it up, but the customer doesn't seem to be paying any attention. He wouldn't look at me or answer my greeting. He just stared right down the conveyor belt. Maybe he was just a bit zoned out. The conveyor belt didn't look too dirty. I hadn't had a chance to wash it yet, because the second I walked over to the register, people lined up. Side note, always bag your produce. The conveyor belts get really nasty. I tell the man his total, which was something like $4.36, and he starts fishing in his pocket for the exact change without looking up. Inwardly I groan, but I keep my customer service smile fixed in place while I wait. He is wearing one of those muddy brown denim jackets with lots of pockets, and as he rifles through them, I kept catching whiffs of stale BO and cigarettes. His hands were pretty dirty too, and all dried out from the cold weather. He dumps out an assortment of change on the counter, still not looking at me, and I begin to count it up. Everything is uncomfortably quiet. I can feel the eyes of every customer waiting in line boring into me, all except for the guy that was now digging in his pants pockets too. He was about 30 cents short. I let him know once I was sure that he wasn't going to find any more coins. It was then he looks at me, making this scrunched up face. His eyes were very dark brown, almost black, and they pierced right into me, accusingly, as if he thought I was lying or something. While he was watching, I counted everything. It's only 30 cents. Can't you give me your employee discount? No, that's against the rules, I answered apologetically. Do you want to put something back? I wasn't about to get fired for giving someone my discount, which was only 10% if you were wondering. He wasn't the first person to ask for it, but most people pretended that they were joking. He was definitely not joking. No, I want them, he said, glaring at me. I was beginning to wish that he would start staring at the conveyor belt again, instead of me. He was making me pretty uncomfortable. If I had 30 cents in my pocket, I would have just paid for it myself, just to get this guy to leave. He reaches over to take the bag, but I turn the little bag carousel, so he can't. That was probably a stupid move on my part, but it wasn't like I could just let him steal, right? If my register was short 30 cents, my supervisor would be all over me. I knew you'd get a discount. Just plug it in. He completely blows up at this point. But I just shake my head and look at the other customers, probably with a deer in headlights expression. People are watching, but no one does anything. This is just something inconveniencing them, even though I'm actually pretty scared. I already started flashing my register light so that the CSM would come over, but they were notorious for taking their sweet time. I'll get a CSM, but it might take a few minutes, I nervously offer, but the man just goes off and goes on about how much he needed it. He leaves it before the supervisor comes over, grabbing all of his change and shoving them all into his pocket before stomping off. I'm relieved that he's gone and continue working in uneasy silence. Everything seemed to go back to normal after that. My shift ends at midnight, and I managed to clock out on time for once. I didn't have a car, and would normally call my mom to come and pick me up, but she was out of town, and it was too late to call anyone else, so I decided to walk rather than waste money on a cab. I lived about 20 minutes away, and felt pretty safe walking because you didn't really tend to run into people at that hour. After a few minutes walking, I noticed this car driving really slowly behind me. The speed limit was 45, and this car was probably going about 10 miles per hour. I got a bad gut feeling and started to walk a little faster while trying to rationalize it. It could have been someone who wanted to offer me a ride home or get directions. But no, whoever it was stayed behind me and did not try to pull up next to me at all, even though they were going really slow. After about 5 minutes of this, the car finally turns off into one of the neighborhoods. I was relieved, but it was short-lived. The driver parked his car on the curb and gets out of his car. He then comes jogging up to me. I realized immediately that it was the yogurt Band-Aid guy. He was wearing the same muddy brown jacket and staring at me with those dark eyes. I turn around and start jogging down the sidewalk, which is kinda icy, and he just jogs right up next to me. I can actually hear the change jiggling in his pocket. He doesn't say anything at first, so I just try to run faster without slipping. Had this guy been sitting in the parking lot for hours, waiting for me to get off work? Apparently so. I feel him staring at me, and I turn my head to look at him while still running as fast as I could on the ice. I thank my lucky stars that there was fresh gravel laid out, or I probably would have slipped in a classic horror movie cliche. "What color is your underwear?" he asked. The question horrified and disgusted me, so my immediate reaction was, "Don't be a creep," and I punched him right in the face. It hurt my hand like a bitch, but he stops running for a second and bends forward, clutching at his face. I swear I heard him say, "Okay," but I just kept running and was too scared to look back. I'm not sure if he kept following me after that, but I didn't run straight home because I was scared of him figuring out where I lived. When I did make it home, probably an hour later, I went to my landlady's apartment first and told her what happened. I was really shaken up, and I told her if she saw a suspicious guy around the building, she should call the police. My mom was out of town, and she didn't answer any of my calls, so I watched Disney movies until I was calm enough to go to sleep. The next day, I told my managers about what happened, but they didn't really care. In hindsight, I probably should have called the police, but I was young, and I thought that if it was necessary, my management would have told me to do so. Don't know why I thought that, considering they had a way of not really caring about employees. I felt pretty angry that they didn't take me serious, or care that I was scared. I wanted to go home early because I was scared that the guy would show up again, but they told me I couldn't and made me go work the registers. I quit shortly after. I never did see Yogurt Band-Aid guy again, but it's been about 10 years, and I'm not sure if I would even recognize him if I did. When I was in high school, I knew my parents' divorce was imminent. My mom was cheating on my dad, and my dad was cheating on my mom. I did everything I could to prevent my parents from divorcing, but I knew it was a lost cause. My mother had been planning on leaving him for a long time and eventually served him on my 17th birthday. They agreed to live under the same roof until I was out of high school, so I wouldn't have to stress having two homes. When I was a little over 18, my mom had been consistently conversating with a new man on multiple dating apps. She even got an app that I was known to use called Kick Messenger. She fell asleep with the app open one night, and I seen that she was messaging a man. I'm not going to use his name due to privacy concerns. I ignored it, but I knew the name and seen his face multiple times on her cell phone. Fast forward maybe 2 months. My dad and I were just spending some time together and wanted to go somewhere to eat. His friend called him up that night. My dad has been known to be a social drinker who frequented local bars. He had many good friends that were bartenders and fellow social drinkers. His friend was at the local bar and met a man named AJ who was looking for my father, by name, in order to buy a vehicle. My dad was a car sales manager. So we stopped by the bar that night because we just thought we would eat there. The bar isn't really shabby, or the typical bar most people would think of. We lived in a small town, and the bar was on the lake, and people could rent lots and put campers on it. It was more like a club lodge. This man introduced himself as AJ. However, I recognized him immediately as the man that my mother had been conversating online with. I didn't say anything to my dad at first. I for sure just thought that he looked similar, and that I was overreacting. That was until he called me by my full name, without anyone introducing him to me, or even saying my name. He knew my first, middle, and last name. He also came up to me to greet me at the table I was sitting at. He tried getting me to open lotto tickets for him, and was rubbing against me and trying to touch my inner thighs. I was kind of frozen and didn't know what to do. He eventually left me alone when he saw people staring at him. I did what I knew to do. I searched his full name on Google and Facebook, and that's when I found out that he was a registered sex offender, ex-con, in a bordering state. I looked repeatedly from AJ to the man on my phone screen, and there was no doubt he was the same dude. He only lived about 30 minutes away from my own home. I pulled my dad to the side and told him that this man was not who he said he was. I showed him the picture and the information I found. I ran to the bathroom crying because I knew something bad was happening. He lied about his name, knowing me and my father's name, and knowing where my father worked. After hearing this info, my dad refused to go outside with AJ. He made multiple attempts at getting my dad outside alone to take a look at my dad's truck due to the fact that he wanted something similar. He eventually stopped pushing my dad and went outside to smoke. The manager of the bar immediately locked the doors and locked him outside, refusing to let him back in. Everyone in the bar, most of them were close friends with my dad, had seen how suspicious he was acting, and many had seen him rubbing up against me. The manager called the cops to report him. It didn't take long for him to figure out that he had been caught, and he attempted to leave the bar and drive away. My dad followed him up the road, trying to make sure he didn't get away. However, he was plastered enough and ended up crashing into a snowbank just up the road from the bar. He was caught by the police and charged with a DWI. He was jailed just 5 minutes up the road from my home. I did not sleep good that night, and sleep was bad for about a month. If he knew my family as well as he seemed to, he probably knew where I lived. He was bailed out only 2 days after the incident. His vehicle had been found with duct tape, drugs, rope, a crowbar, and other materials in it when they impounded his car. He was also charged with violating his probation. He is a Tier 3 sex offender, which means he raped a minor with a deadly weapon and was required to register for life. He was not supposed to leave the state at the time of the incident, not supposed to have a Facebook or any form of social media where he could reach out to minors, and he was not allowed to operate a vehicle due to his license being taken away. I ended up pressing charges for sexual harassment, as well as getting a restraining order against him. I also found out later through phone records that the police had been tracking his phone and that he had driven past my home more than 20 times in the week leading up to the incident. He had also been to my dad's job and my school multiple times throughout a period of 6 months. He had been following both of us for a long time. I never experienced something so crazy in my life. I live in a completely different state, thousands of miles away now, thank God, but my family is still in the state where the incident happened. He has yet to be charged or arrested for the harassment stalking charges, and probably never will, seeing as he knows if he comes back to the state, he can be arrested because he has a warrant. Since then, I don't ever put my full name on social media. I only put my first name. I've become a very paranoid person when it comes to my full name and my address or other personal info. Please everyone, be careful who you talk to on online dating sites. You never know who's behind the screen or what their true intentions are. And if you do find someone you like, investigate, do your homework. I lived in a town with a population of 5,000 and I never once thought this kind of thing could happen to me, but it can. So, some context. I've never really been in a long-term relationship. I've dated a girl a bit, but I haven't dated a guy. I'm bi. And I've never slept with either a girl or a guy. I'm a 20-year-old female. This story, like anyone else my age, I started swiping on Tinder to try to put myself out there. I like to think I'm not naive and pretty intuitive about people, but I wasn't perceptive about this guy at all. Jake and I swiped and matched each other 2 days ago. Jake first messaged me telling me he wanted to meet me and my dog, and that he thought we were both cute. Liking his directness, I said we should meet up. The night was the first red flag. When I didn't message him back immediately, he messaged me asking if he was detecting negativity. Chalking it up to nervousness, I apologized and explained why I didn't answer, and all was good. We planned to meet up last night at the bar. Flag number 2 was waved when I arrived at the bar. It's important to note, in the state where I live, any place selling liquor cannot let in someone under 21. I didn't know this, and had been reassured by Jake that I could get in no problem. Of course, this wasn't true. Luckily, in retrospect, unfortunately, seeing my birthday was in a week, the bouncer let me in anyway. Within minutes, Jake was at the bar too. Meeting this guy, he seemed normal. Red leather jacket, chucks, typical normal dude. He orders me a gin and tonic, and one for himself, and we settle into talk. He tells me about his life, and his family, and I do the same. We play pool at one point, so I put my drink down. This is when things get a little blurry. I can't remember most of our conversation up until we happened to get back to my place. I remember us leaving, us getting into his car, and us getting back near to my place. You have to understand, I don't drink much, but one drink does not get me drunk. I barely ever brown out, and I never black out. This is important to note. Once in my town, we decided to go in the nearby market to pick up food. As we were there, red flag 3 occurs. Seeing someone I thought I knew, I told Jake I was going to say hi. He awkwardly backed away and stood outside at that point, refusing to meet her. I was wrong though, I didn't know the girl, so I soon rejoined him to walk to my place. As we open the door to my place, my roommate Mandy opens the door. We say hi, talking a little, and she mentions that she's going to take a shower. Jake at this point creepily makes a "oh" sound. Mandy is also a little tipsy at this point, and mentions some guy she wants to have sex with. No biggie, it's the way she rolls. But after his expression and the realization of how tired I was, I say he should go. He does, with no attempt at any physical contact. This is where the story should end, but it doesn't. Within a few minutes, dude blows up my phone with messages saying he is more open-minded, like my roommate, calling me boring, implying that I'm not attracted to guys, saying that he felt no chemistry, and hoped we would have cuddled. I show my roommate, who gasped. Me not getting the full meaning of the open-minded comment, since I was kind of out of it. I ask her why she's so shocked. Finally I get it. He's implying that he wants to sleep with her. That he is more open to sex than I am. Creepy. So creepy. At this point I'm freaking out. Slowly I realize how I'm acting and feeling, putting together how one drink shouldn't make me feel this way. I realized I might have been drugged. Mandy and I go to the local police, and we report it. I decided not to get tested. I could explain why, but until you're in my position, possibly drugged at 3 a.m., embarrassed, worried you're wrong, worried you might be charged for underage drinking, don't judge. It's a lot harder than it looks to go through the whole process. Anyway, the story ends. I'm terrified because he knows where I live, and with me sleeping off whatever's in my body. So I'm a female, 23 now, but in this story I was 21 with a 4-month-old baby. I'm about 5'9", a bit overweight, and I have social anxiety around new people. I went with my sister to her work. She was 26 and 5 feet tall. She worked at a very nice restaurant in the shopping center, and we went straight there for a 6 p.m. start after being in the city all day collecting money for a cat rescue. I'm just chilling out, eating food and binging on Reddit when I decided I wanted a smoke. I know, bad habit. So I let my sister know I'm going out to the car park to have a smoke as she passes through the dining area. The cart was only about 70 meters away from the restaurant, having good lighting, and because it was so late, I could hang around near the doors. This is where it gets creepy. The security guard was doing his rounds, at about my height, and Indian. He decides to check on me. That's cool, man. I'm just having a smoke. The conversation goes like this. How you doing? You okay? I'm pretty good. I'm just waiting for my sister to get off work. Good, good. Your baby? Very cute baby. I have 4 at home. You got a husband? Yes, he's my baby. That's good. I have a fiance, which was a complete lie. I was 100% single, but he was already making me anxious. I could be husband. I look after baby for you. I look after you. No thanks. I'm sure your wife wouldn't appreciate that. No. Wife loves baby. Wife will love you. You come home with me? Finally, I finished my smoke and moved further away from him each second. No thanks. I'm good now. He followed me inside. I go all around the mostly closed shopping center, hoping that I would lose him in Kohl's. I lost him for about 5 seconds, but Kohl's shut down for the night. The only place left open was my sister's work, so I went back there, even though I didn't want him to know where I was. As I was about to walk into the restaurant, I saw him coming up the escalator. He was still watching me. I take the last 2 steps towards the hostess, who happens to be the owner's daughter, and told her what was going on. At this point, the security guard was standing in front of the restaurant, still staring at me. The hostess takes me into a semi-secluded booth and goes to talk to her dad about the situation. As she's gone, the creepy security guard comes into the dining area, searches for me, and then comes and sits in my booth, way too close to me and my child. How are you? I want to ravish a pretty woman. You will be the mother of my babies. We will make cute babies. At this point, it was very clear that I was uncomfortable, and he still made it worse. Don't worry. I security. I protect you and the baby. He reaches across the table with one hand now. The other hand is reaching towards my baby. I'm frozen. I didn't care about the hand near me. I was watching the other one. No one touches my baby. I'm about to snap, full mama bear mode, when the owner, 40-ish to 50 years old, 6 feet tall, big wide build, of the restaurant steps in, asking if there's a problem. Is there a problem? No problem. Just talking with my lovely lady. This is a customer. Has she done something wrong? No, never. She's my lady, see? We're gonna get married. And then he grins creepily, the silent warning for me to play along etched in his face. Finding comfort in the restaurant owner's presence, I said, please leave me alone. I just want to eat my dinner. Haha, funny lady. See, we joke. I don't know you. Please leave me alone. She says she wants you to leave now. She's just messing. She loved me. I've been waiting for you, my pretty lady. He leaves at that point. The restaurant owner makes sure I'm okay and moves me to the employee break room and then fills my sister in. 2 hours later, and my sister has finished her shift, we pack up and head out to the car. The security guard appears out of nowhere. He was actually waiting for me. I take pretty lady and baby home now. Come, pretty lady, we go home. The restaurant owner, like an angel, steps out of his car right behind the security guard and says, she's going home with her sister. No, pretty lady mine. She come home with me. Get in the car, I'll take care of this. So we get in the car and go home. Find out that the next day from my sister that her boss had physically restrained the security guard because he went to go grab my arm as I was getting in the car. He then got him fired and permanently banned from the shopping center. I used to be a security officer at a homeless shelter earlier this year. I worked there for almost 5 months before leaving. I have tons of creepy and scary stories from my time there. So back in March, I was at work doing what I needed to do. On the ground floor was a daytime only homeless shelter, and on the top was a government homeless outreach office. This is who my contact was through, but I had to keep the entire building secure, even though the shelter was a different organization. The government office was a mental health branch, so it wasn't uncommon for crazy people to, well, act crazy. This particular day, an individual comes in to pick up their medication. The man took their medication and walked over to the couch and sits there in the office. After sitting down, the guy starts digging through his backpack, pulls out a bag full of white pills. This instantly catches my attention. He grabs his pocket knife, doesn't open the blade, but smashes 3 or 4 pills and uses his hand to make 3 lines, then snorts the dust up. What remained he swept off the table. This is now considered to be an acting hostile and potentially illegal, so I walk over to him and start trying to make him leave. He keeps telling me, "I gotta take my meds." I inform him that he needs to leave. Then he says out loud without looking at me, "I got a suppressed 9mm in my bag that will make you and that bitch shut up." Alarm bells start ringing. I know that I have a potential active shooter scenario in my hands, and I'm an unarmed officer. I calmly walk backwards to the receptionist and whisper to her to get the other client up and call 911 and lock herself in the exam room and do not open the door. She does this, as well as informing the other caseworker of the situation, and they lock and barricade the doors. There are cameras in the lobby, so this is all recorded and turned over to the police. After many other attempts to get this man to leave and informing him that the police were called and en route, he gets up, gets in my face, and tells me quietly, "I'm coming back for you one day," and then storms out. The police arrive 5 minutes later, and they examine the footage. They put out an APB on the man and take samples of the powder on the table. A few days later, they informed me that they found the man with no guns and no drugs. The powder turned out to be antipsychotic medicine. He had alleged that he lost the bottle they came in. Nothing bad happened, but still, for a 19-year-old unarmed security guard, this scared the shit out of me. So I'm not the best at writing or describing things, but something happened to me 3 days ago, and it's been on my mind non-stop. I've had nightmares a lot. I'm going away for 5 months this summer to work in Greece, same thing I did last year. But this time, it's not as much of a last-minute decision, so I planned ahead to take a few family members away on a low-budget British caravan holiday, so we could spend some time together before I leave. I booked it the week for Friday to Friday. The first few days were good, celebrating Wales winning the Grand Slam in rugby. Monday was much the same. We played bingo in the on-site clubhouse, and this is when I noticed a member of their security team. He looked quite attractive from a distance. I like beards, glasses, so I say to my mother, "Oh, he's nice," and we laughed. A bit later, he approached our table and chatted with us for a little bit about general things going on site and his job. He shook my hand and introduced himself. He then stood by our table on and off all night trying to engage in general conversation. He did make excessive eye contact with me, which was weird, so that's why I thought I was getting such bad anxiety being around him, because he seemed otherwise normal. When we were leaving, he was on duty in the front of the clubhouse. We walked past him and said bye. He said something along the lines of, "Oh, don't go. I've got 2 days off and won't be able to see you." Which I thought was weird because we just met him and had nothing but basic conversation. My mom thought I liked him, so she said she was going to catch up to my dad and let me talk to him. He looked like he was about to say something, but I wasn't interested in being alone with him, so I said, "Can't believe she left me behind. See ya." I could feel him watching me through the dark car park. Again, anxiety. 2 days went by and things were normal, but on the day that he came back for duty, Wednesday, he noticed us straight away and walked over. He winked at me and stood right next to me, putting his elbows on the table, tried to chat away with me, a bit too close to my face. I shrugged it off and went to go play with my nephew in the arcade bowling machine. I could see him out of the corner of my eye watching me from behind. Again, I got really bad anxiety. I went back to my parents' table, and he would walk by every few minutes, looking at me each time. I couldn't stand the anxious feeling in my gut, so I waited until he was gone and made an excuse and went back to the caravan alone. My parents arrived back a few hours later and told me he kept stopping by, asking about me, and asking where I was and if he needed to check on me. He gave my mother a piece of paper with his number on it to give to me. I was embarrassed by that and joked with my mother, like who tries to get someone's mom to be their wingwoman. Thursday was our last day. I decided not to go out because I felt uncomfortable going there now after being watched and throwing his number in a bin. But my parents went elsewhere, so I stayed packing and babysitting my nephew. This is where I got really freaked out. He somehow found my number and began sending me messages on WhatsApp. I replied at first, being polite, and mentioned that I was packing and going home. He started to get a little flirty, so I put the phone on silent and went to bed. My mom had her window and curtains wide open. My dad had fallen asleep on the couch watching TV with my nephew, and I was in the single room alone. I woke up later because I heard rustling noises outside. I froze for a second, but I could hear movement outside by my window. I looked through the teeny gap, and I saw him standing there looking around, and I genuinely thought I was going to have a heart attack. I've never been paralyzed with fear before. I felt like I needed a cough, but I was so terrified to make a sound. I looked at my phone and it was 3:30. I saw a bunch of WhatsApp notifications. I was too scared to open them, so I read a bit from the notification bubble. He told me he knew where I was, and he wanted me to dangle myself out the window for him to play with, along with sending me pictures of himself naked, numerous calls and texts, and all while outside my window. I laid there for about 2 hours, too afraid to move. I must have fallen asleep, because the next thing I remember was my mom waking me up, saying that she had just opened the curtains in the living room and saw him standing right outside. This was 9 a.m., 6 hours later. I never felt so scared in my life. We packed up and got ready to leave. By the time we were about to go, he had gone. I ran to my car with my hood up, paranoid that he would stop us. My parents thought it was really weird for him being out there, but I never told them about all the messages, so they didn't know why I was being so weird. I felt so sick waiting for my dad to start the engine, because I didn't know where he had gone, or if he was still watching. If he had found out my number and caravan, and had seen us in my dad's car with the license plate, what else could he have found out? I have not mentioned this to anyone, because I really can't handle it right now. I feel violated in a way, although I don't know how to describe it.
I lived next to this one kid who always had bandages wrapped around his entire head, even covering his face. I remembered his name was Wilbur, a 12-year-old boy who never left his house. He sometimes looked out of his bedroom window on the top floor at all of the kids who would play outside, while Wilbur just sat and watched. I remembered his windows had metal bars on them, so there was no way he could climb out of his bedroom. We sometimes communicated with each other by writing on pieces of paper, since Wilbur couldn't hear me because his window was locked. Wilbur only did this when his parents weren't around, because they were weird. His mother and father were those kind of parents that were insanely crazy about science and chemistry, well, according to Wilbur. They would stay in their basement and work all day and night, except for those times when they gave Wilbur some food daily. Now, they weren't treating him like an animal. It's just his parents were very busy. They told Wilbur that he shouldn't go outside or make contact with anyone until his face had gotten better. He told me that he'd accidentally slipped on one of his parents' chemicals and had fallen face first, ruining his appearance. And his parents feared that he would be made fun of by the other kids in the neighborhood. I remember one time, a couple of older kids were throwing rocks and pebbles at his windows, laughing and pointing at Wilbur as he looked down at them. He told me that they would do it a few times, but he'd gotten used to it. But to me, he was always a great guy, and still is today. I've never been inside his house, but he showed me some of the cool stuff he collected, like comic books. He had loads of them, from Marvel to DC to other non-superhero comics. He was a huge superhero fan. He even said that he felt like a superhero. A normal human being who became affected by dangerous chemicals and then became a powerful superhero, he once wrote on the paper, and then put it up to his window as he pretended to be a superhero. I had a collection of action figures and video games that amazed Will. He told me that he'd never played a single video game in his life, which was quite sad. He also told me that his babysitter had taken them away before he could play with them, and burnt them in front of his eyes. Wilbur had a mean babysitter named Miss Fitzgerald, a tall, nasty lady who never liked kids at all. This had started before his face had even become messed up, he told me. She was basically every kid's nightmare. At least, according to all the things he told me she's done. Miss Fitzgerald had babysat many kids before, and trust me, it was not pretty. Wilbur told me that the last kid she babysat, a 4-year-old girl, she made her live through 7 hours of hell. Wilbur said that Miss Fitzgerald had starved her and surrounded her bed with a few bear traps, and the worst thing that had happened, well, parents didn't know about her deed. She would lie to them just to get paid. From all the things I've heard, she is a foul, cruel woman with no soul at all. And now, she had to babysit this poor guy. Wilbur was old enough to make his own decisions, except for some, but his parents apparently hired this evil witch anyway. The parents had to go to Texas to a science convention, so Wilbur was left alone with her. One time, I was writing about her to show to him, but then I saw Miss Fitzgerald forcefully pulling him away from the window. One time, I was writing about her to show to him, but then I saw Miss Fitzgerald forcefully pulling him away from the window. And that was that. The rest of my day went by without talking to him. The next day, when I looked through my window to see Wilbur, I saw someone lying down on his bed. Looking at the person's wrapped head, I banged my fist on the window, trying to get Wilbur's attention. He slowly sat up on his bed, wiping tears from his eyes. He seemed to be crying, which gave me a thought. I had a worried look on my face as I saw bruises all over his arms and legs, a faded dark turn of purple. He went to write something down on a piece of paper. Then, as Wilbur finished writing, he came up to the window and pressed the note on the glass. What he had written terrified me. The whole situation still burning in the back of my mind. Something I knew I could never forget. He had written, "Help me." What made it worse was that his handwriting was scribbled onto the paper and was almost illegible. Wilbur kept banging on the window with his other hand. And then, suddenly, I saw someone else running through his bedroom next to him. Yes, it was her. You know who. She was holding something in both of her big, chubby hands. In one hand was a lemon, and in the other was a pair of scissors. What Miss Fitzgerald did next terrified me even more. She ran up to Wilbur, grabbing his head, holding it still. I saw him screaming in pain and fear, so I knew I had to do something. At the same time, I couldn't stop watching. She used her scissors to cut open the bandages and unwrap them off of his head, and threw them to the side. What I saw almost made me vomit. Something so sickening. I was utterly shocked at looking at Wilbur's real, deformed face. His whole head was completely covered by bandages, and what was underneath, I suddenly knew the purpose of those bandages. I saw his face, almost melted off, showing a dark red layer underneath. I could only describe his face as looking like melted cheese on a cheeseburger. It was Wilbur's whole face. Even one of his eyeballs was burnt to bits. Yeah, the chemicals had messed him up badly. Miss Fitzgerald sliced the lemon in half with her scissors, pinning Wilbur down on his bed. Then she threw the scissors to the side, next to the bandages, and held his head still with one hand. With the other hand, she squeezed a lemon slice onto Wilbur's head, into his eyes, into the red layer of his face. Oh, the painful expression on his face, his loud, muffled screams, his face stinging from the acid of the lemon juice. She used the other part of the lemon to squeeze onto his face again, torturing Wilbur with extreme pain. I decided to bang my fist on the window, which was a bad idea. Miss Fitzgerald just looked over to the bedroom window, right at me. I jumped back, because she had noticed me. She ran back out of the bedroom, shoving Wilbur down as he screamed in pain and agony. I knew what she was going to do, so I ran out of my bedroom and ran downstairs. The good thing about this situation was that my parents don't know about Wilbur, coupled with the fact that they were at work for a little while. I locked the front door, hoping that Miss Fitzgerald wouldn't burst into my house. I looked around for the phone, but while I was doing this, a loud bang rang in my ears. I looked behind at the door, noticing her red, sweaty face and her curly blonde hair looking in. By the looks in her eyes, I knew there was going to be some trouble. She kept banging on the door, nearly screaming her head off. As I looked around for the phone, I finally found it, next to the couch on the coffee table. I ran towards it, dialing 911, as the sounds of her threatening screams could be heard from outside. After waiting for a few rings, I finally heard the operator's voice, the usual greeting from a 911 operator. I started explaining the whole situation from beginning to end, as quickly and as clearly as possible. They told me to wait patiently, as the police would arrive at my house soon. It took a few minutes for the police to arrive, and, when they did, my parents also arrived earlier from work as well. Apparently, they had got a call from the police, explaining my situation, and decided to immediately come home. Oh, my parents were extremely worried and frightened. They asked me more questions than the police did. I had to explain everything, from being friends with Wilbur to how his parents had left him with an abusive babysitter to what she had done. About an hour later, a police officer came to me. He had something he wanted to tell me about the horrible atrocities that had taken place next door. The truth about the babysitter, the parents, and Wilbur was truly shocking. Based on the evidence they'd found, Wilbur's parents weren't his actual parents at all. They'd adopted him from an orphanage that's out of town, just so they could perform an experiment on him. It was the reason why they'd moved to Texas, to hide. The babysitter, Miss Fitzgerald, was part of the experiment too. In fact, Wilbur wasn't the first kid to get adopted by these scientists. They had done illegal experiments on these orphans. It was to find out how much pain a child could take before death, based on the cause of death and the age of the child. 38 children between the ages of 2 and 13 had been reported missing, and Wilbur was one of them. There were security cameras on the outside and inside of the house. Then they arrested Miss Fitzgerald for child cruelty and the deaths of so many children, and are now in the process of finding the two scientists. So, I was friends with someone who would have been killed if I hadn't called the police. Apparently, Wilbur also tried to lie about almost everything he told me. He was just trying to protect himself. He was sent to a new trusted family, a married couple who lived out of town. After that, I never saw him again. Well, until now. 20 years after that incident, I went to a bar to get myself a few drinks, when a man approached me. "Remember me?" he said. I smiled, realizing how long it had been since I last saw Wilbur. In fact, he now looks like a nice, healthy man, without his bandages. He's brown-haired, with sky blue eyes. And, to be honest, he almost looked like a complete stranger. After that, we talked and drank a few glasses of beer, finally speaking to each other in person. Wilbur and I knew that nobody would try to keep us apart, that the scientist and the babysitter are probably still locked away right now. And I keep thinking about that again and again. The fact that this man would have been killed if I hadn't saved his life. I want to begin by saying that I've been an over-the-road trucker for the past 2 years now. Ever since I was 21, and I honestly love what I do, even if it's for ungrateful people. But during the past 2 years, I've seen some unnatural things on the road. Things that have things that have no real explanation. Some feel evil, others just odd. I'll begin with the one that most people who are, or who have family in an industry, have experienced or at least have heard of: the black dog. I won't go into too much detail, but every commercial driver has to follow hours of service regulations stating you can drive no more than 11 hours a day, and you can't be on duty more than 14. If either are met, it requires a 10-hour rest break. Seeing the black dog is caused by your brain forcing a shutdown because of fatigue while you're driving. It happens so quickly. You fall asleep with your eyes open, blending reality and the dream state, causing hallucinations. The old wives' tale states that if you see the black dog, well, it's time to get some rest. Some say the dog is there to protect people from getting into accidents, sort of like a guardian angel. But after this experience, I think there's more to it than everything previously stated. 6 months in, as an over-the-road driver, I had a delivery to make in Tonawanda, New York, and was coming up through Pennsylvania on one of the state routes. It was right around 10 p.m., and I still had about 3 hours left to drive. Now, I can't stress this part enough. I wasn't even remotely tired. I came around a winding set of curves on this route through the forest. I came around a blind left curve, and there I saw it. A black dog, come darting out into the road. I was travelling at 50 miles an hour, with 42,900 pounds in the trailer. There was no way I could stop in time. I stabbed into the brakes, and then I felt the thud. Yes, I felt the truck hit this dog. There's no way it would survive being hit by 76,000 pounds at 50 miles an hour. When I finally came to a stop, about 400 feet later, I pulled off as far to the right as I could and turned on my four-ways. I stepped down out of the truck and walked around to the front. No damage, no blood, no scratches, no anything. I walked all the way back to where I'd hit the dog. No blood, No mangled mess of bone and fur. There was nothing. I went back and grabbed my flashlight out of the truck and started heading to where I'd hit it to look around. If it was someone's dog, they had a right to know what had happened. I searched for this dog for 30 minutes and found nothing. I was completely confused, but I gave up the search and turned to walk back to my truck. As I turned, I got chills down my spine. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I broke out in a cold sweat. The dog was sitting just below my driver's side mirror, staring at me. I could only see it because of the amber marker light on the side of my truck. I decided to shine my flashlight on the dog, but as soon as the beam of light hit it, it just vanished. Gone. My gut told me it was time to get out of Dodge. I ran back to my truck, climbed inside, locked the doors, released my brakes, and booked it down the road. For the next 5 miles, I swear, I kept seeing this black dog on the side of the road, just staring back up at me. Something didn't feel right about it at all. It was always staring at me, always expressionless. It didn't do anything but sit there. But it would disappear, and then I'd see it again. The fear I've never felt before started creeping up on me. I was legitimately scared at that point. I didn't know what to do. There was nowhere within enough space for a 73-foot combination vehicle to turn around. This delivery needed to happen. So, as they say, I kept on trucking. 15 miles later, weird things started to happen. My interior lights would turn themselves off and on. My headlights would flicker erratically. I began to lose air pressure from my brakes, which is not good. If your air pressure drops below 20 to 40 psi, there's not enough air pressure to keep the springs held back from applying both the truck and trailer brakes full force. I got down to 60 psi. The low air warning light came on, and I pulled over to the side of the road, applied my brakes and 4 ways, and got out to check what was making me lose air pressure. All of my airlines were severed. It looked as if they were bitten clean in half. The airlines on big trucks are designed to withstand 150 psi of outward pressure, and something just bit them in half like it was nothing. I'd notified dispatch of the breakdown, put out my reflective triangles, and waited. An hour had passed, and I didn't see a damn thing. Another 18-wheeler was coming up in my rears, so I switched on my CB into channel 19, which is the common channel, and radioed to keep to the left, as there was a very small shoulder, and I was about halfway into the lane of travel. He radioed back. 10-4. Thanks for the heads up, driver. Everything all right? So, I radioed back. Yeah, airlines are busted. Waiting on the wrecker to get it. He didn't respond after that. He came past me without slowing down, easily doing 60 in a 45 zone. I watched him follow the curve to the left. Then, brake lights. I heard the screeching of tires and watched as he swerved off the road and into a pine tree. I climbed out of my truck and ran over to him. The truck was smashed in, and a branch was pierced through the windshield. I quickly opened up the driver door, and there I saw it. The branch had impaled him through the shoulder, just above the armpit. Blood was leaking out of the area, but the branch was acting like a plug almost, preventing excessive blood loss. The driver was unconscious. I immediately called 911, gave them the state route and mile marker of the accident, the nature of his wounds. They notified EMS and the state police right away. 20 minutes later, they arrived. They had to use a saw to cut the branch both in front and behind the driver. They had to carry him down from the truck to the gurney. He finally came to. He started crying, not out of pain, but remorse. The only thing he kept saying was, "Did I hit her? Did I hit that poor girl?" I was taken aback by shock. The last house I'd passed was 3 miles away, and there were no houses in sight of this stretch of the road. The ambulance rushed him off to the hospital. The police notified the towing company to come and get its truck, and called his company to inform them. I gave the state police my witness statement, and shortly after, the wrecker for my truck arrived, along with a relay driver to finish my delivery. The towman took a look at my airlines. All he said was, "You saw it, didn't you? The dog. You saw it." Shaken, I replied, "Yes." All I got back was, "It saved your life, kid. Remember that." We got the truck hooked up, and I was on my way, having it towed to a dealership about 30 miles away. That was the last time I ever saw the black dog. Well, so far, at least. I don't know what it is, what it wants, why it chooses who it does. All I know is that it saved my life. So, if in your travels you ever see the black dog, pull over. Immediately. I have plenty more stories to tell, but I don't know if people want to hear them. Let me know and I'll try to get more written down. Oh, and after doing some research, the nearest houses to where this took place, well, there aren't any family homes. No children whatsoever. The year was 1980. My wife and I lived in the suburbs of San Diego. Normal Heights, to be exact. We lived in a small house we rented after moving from Imperial Beach about 10 miles to the south. I worked as a quality assurance manager at a small machine shop nearby. It was a small, quiet neighborhood. This was after the war in Vietnam had ended and a lot of the Vietnamese refugees had come to America, a lot of whom had moved into our area. They were friendly enough. However, we were not very sociable people and mostly kept to ourselves. It was me, my wife, and our 2 dogs, Jeep and Buck. Jeep was wicked smart. At times, it was almost like interacting with another human being. Buck was more of a doofus, but a master escape artist. I couldn't count how many times I'd gone to look for him when he'd find his way out of the yard or run amok through the neighborhood. Nothing unusual or strange happened at that house, nor was I ever worried about my family's safety. Most people knew I was not the one to mess with. After all, I had a rather brutal upbringing. My father hung around with bikers and mafia types. Well, I was practically raised by 1%ers. In fact, not long before that, the police had broken into my house, guns drawn, ordering me on the ground and asserting that they would blow my head off. I'll, let you use your imagination to guess why. So, as you can imagine, I'm not easily frightened. That is, until that one night. A night I don't think I'll ever forget. My wife and I were dead asleep that night. I'd gotten off of work late and I was exhausted. When I suddenly awoke to a sound I can only describe as a car smashing into a brick building at full speed. That sent me to vertical in no time flat. My wife and I stared at each other, both of us too shocked to move. After a second or two, I motioned for my wife to stay in bed as I made my way cautiously through the house. It all happened so quick, I couldn't tell where it had come from or what it could possibly have been. I looked out my back door, unable to see anything, as a heavy marine fog had rolled in, leaving me only 10 feet or so of visibility. I quickly grabbed a flashlight from the cabinet by the door and carefully made my way out of the door. The first thing I noticed as I stepped out into my yard was the silence. There were no crickets chirping, no dogs barking, absolute stillness. I felt the hairs on my arms stand on end as I began to become more and more uneasy as I slowly moved through the yard. My yard was small, surrounded by an old 6-foot-tall wooden fence. there was a single low-wattage flashlight above the back porch, which only served to increase the growing feeling of eerie dread that came over me. As I approached the back gate, I stopped dead in my tracks as I shone the flashlight up onto the gate. Or, more accurately, where the gate used to be. I stood there, amazed. It looked as though the gate had been completely ripped off the fence. What could have possibly torn a heavy 6-foot wooden gate straight from the fence? Even the post was torn apart. I shone my flashlight up past the gate, and to my disbelief, I saw my gate across the alley in my neighbour's yard, on the other side of his short chain-link fence, about 25 or 30 feet from where I stood. It was then that I decided whatever had done that was not something I wanted to meet, not with just a flashlight. I turned around and bolted back inside. Needless to say, we didn't get much sleep that night. A few days went by, and all was quiet, as it always had been, until our neighbour, an older, heavier-set lady, showed up at our door. Apparently, she had found Jeep pouring at her door that morning. However, Buck never came home, nor did we ever see him again. That was 20 years ago, and to this day, I don't know what ever happened to old Buck. But what I do know is that shortly after Jeep returned home, my wife and I saw a news story about a group of Vietnamese refugees who had been detained by the local police for hunting neighborhoods for dogs. All of this only after a neighbor had happened upon them cooking the poor creatures a dozen at a time. I work as an emergency medical courier. What's that, you ask? Basically, hospitals and retirement homes run out of supplies and meds like you wouldn't imagine. Oftentimes, I'm delivering blood or surgical tools to an ER while someone is on the operating table from a gunshot wound or stabbing. I've had calls where someone is having a heart transplant and needed blood immediately, or they'd be dead. There must be a lot of gangs in my town, because I sure stay busy. Sometimes I'll receive a delivery for organs even. I'm on call and constantly busy. I only work at nights, as it's easier to travel and to get to where I'm going to much faster. Let's turn the clock back 2 weeks to where this all started going downhill, and my life faded to black. So, I get a call to pick up some blood from the Red Cross and take it to the hospital in Paoli, Indiana. Okay, no problem, I thought. Hell, it's only an hour-and-a-half drive, easy. I grab my keys and my service pistol. I'm a veteran with a concealed carry permit and never leave home without it. I head out to retrieve the red blood cells for delivery. I arrive at Red Cross for the blood, show my badge to get in, and sign for it. So far, so good. It's approximately 11:30 at night. Roads are clear and the weather isn't bad. No traffic, well, aside from all over the road truckers. Cross over the bridge to Indiana, and I'm now on Highway 150, westbound to Paoli. I have the blood in the back seat, and everything's going fine. I turn on cruise control and set it to 50 mpg, and sit back and relax. Have some music playing. A slight drizzle begins to come down all around. Now, low visibility with fog. It's pitch black, with no streetlights on these long country roads. Suddenly, 2 large deer are in front of me. I slam on my brakes, and they lock up on the wet road. Smash! I slam into the 2 deer directly. My car's fucked. I call dispatch and alert them to the situation. I'm now out in the middle of frickin' nowhere with blood that needs to get to the hospital immediately. I call AAA for a tow. My car is in complete disarray. I wait for a driver to come and retrieve the blood to complete the delivery, as I wait for the tow truck as well. My livelihood is driving for a living, and now my car is junk. The 2 deer scatter in different directions as I get out a flashlight and assess the damage. It's 20 degrees out and the heat doesn't work in my now destroyed car. Eventually, my car and I make it back home. I order parts to try to save my work vehicle, as I also have a family and I need it for everyday use. I'm now out of work, or at least until I can make the necessary repairs. Days come and go, and I get the parts. Radiator, fan clutch, coolant reservoir, and the like. After days working on my car, bending metal, stomping on my hood, and replacing everything I need, I did all this in the freezing cold. Well, finally, I get the son of a bitch running. Yes, finally I can get back to work. So the weekend comes, and I'm working. Everything's normal, and I'm happily making money again to provide for my now 2-year-old son. Wanting the best for him, I'm working as much as possible. I get home from work, and I'm exhausted. I go to sleep and try to catch a quick nap before my next shift. My wife takes the kids and is doing some last-minute laundry, as we're moving soon, and our lease was just about up. I'm out like a light after driving for 14 hours. I wake up to a monster on top of me, making loud noises. Disoriented, I look around, frantic. It's my German Shepherd, Odin. He's 2 years old and 75 pounds of pure hellhound. His fierce barking puts me in a frenzy. I try to look at my surroundings, but all I see is the thickest dark black smoke you could ever imagine. I grab my phone and light up my flashlight. I can't even see an inch in front of my face. Wearing a t-shirt and shorts, Odin and I make our way downstairs, trying to escape. I can't breathe as I inhale the most horrible fumes and gases from whatever the hell is causing this madness. We're now outside. I call 911, coughing and falling to the ground, slowly losing consciousness from the smoke inhalation. Oh, gee. I yell into the phone. Our 5-pound terrier is still in the house. The operator makes it clear I'm not to enter the home and to wait for the fire department. No idea how long they'll take. Opening the door to my old-ass Ford Ranger, Odin jumps in the driver's seat. I race back into the smoke-infested home, flames coming from the basement. Visibility is now 0, and the smoke is toxic. Frantically searching with my phone's flashlight, trying to yell with whatever voice I have left. The operator, still on the line. Using speakerphone, I hear them asking me, "Sir, please remain outside." I feel something brush up against me as I make my way to the top story of the house. I scoop up Dillinger, and we nope the fuck out of there. Just as we make our escape, the flames are rising as my wife and kids pull up. She's freaking out and yelling and screaming as I hand her the dog and collapse to the ground. I'm slipping in and out of consciousness. What feels like hours, but was probably only minutes later, the fire department arrives as well as EMS. I'm now being carried by 2 large firemen to the back of the ambulance, as I see about 15 men getting suited up with gas masks, axes, and the big-ass water hoses. They rush into my burning home, hearing my wife yelling and my 2-year-old boy crying for me. I feel someone or something pushing against my ribs and something soft against my mouth. I now know the EMS woman was administering CPR and chest compressions to keep me from passing out. I'm awake in the back of the ambulance, being questioned by a fireman and investigators, asking me health-related questions. Choking and coughing, I'm barely able to relay much, still very disoriented and confused as to what had just occurred. I tell them as much as I know, which wasn't much, as I was just sleeping before I had to get up for work. I try to go back inside. I learn that they cut the power and said we couldn't stay there anymore. I wanted to grab some things if I could. Pissed off, I go sit back down. Them wanting to take me to the hospital. I yelled, "How can I leave my family? They now have no roof over their head and it's freezing cold. They have no food. Fuck the hospital. I have to take care of them." "Sergeant, we have a refusal," I hear him say. "It's okay, son, but I must warn you, there will be some side effects from smoke inhalation. You need to get it checked out in the next few days." "Yes, sir," I muttered. Well, turns out the dryer somehow malfunctioned and caught on fire. The lint tray was empty, and the dryer plug untouched and unharmed. It was very strange, and they were all baffled. Taking notes, the fireman gave the model number for the dryer to see if there were any recalls for that particular one. It's 2 days later, and I'm cleaning the place out, salvaging what I can get, and throwing out everything that was damaged by smoke and fire. Thankfully, I had renter's insurance, and they sent us some emergency funds so we could have a roof over our head and food to eat. My family was up in a hotel, as I'm covered in soot and smoke. I hear from their fire investigator. He informs me that if the dog hadn't woken me up, when he did, a few minutes later, I would have been dead for sure. 2 things I'm grateful for: renter's insurance and my best friend Odin, the German Shepherd. I urge everyone to get both. I showered my best friend with some well-earned treats. Well, I haven't slept in days, and I nearly died from simply trying to rest before work. So now, I'm terrified every time I lay in bed. So, here's to another night of no sleep.
So, I grew up in Las Vegas. I'd moved there when I was in 2nd grade. I was around 7 or so, and my mother was working at some sort of motorcycle repair shop in Arizona that just wasn't paying the bills at all. So, she jumped at the offer of a new job. Fast forward about 5 years, I'm in middle school, and my brother and I were almost exactly 2 years apart. I was about to turn 12, so he was around 10 at the time. My mother, being quite low on the seniority list, was forced to work late nights. That left me and my brother home alone after school more often than not. Our nights were usually pretty uneventful, usually consisted of us avoiding whatever homework we were assigned, warming up leftovers in the microwave, and watching whatever sparked our interest on TV, which was either WWE wrestling or some kind of cartoon. We usually ended up in bed before our mum got home, but occasionally we'd wait up for her. One night, or I suppose one afternoon considering it was still light, everything was pretty normal. My brother sat on the living room floor, engulfed in whatever was on the TV, and I was using my mother's desktop computer, leveling up my character on RuneScape. Then there was a rather aggressive knock at the door, which was very odd. I was sort of an outcast child. I didn't have too many friends, nor did my brother. Not only that, we lived in what you would consider a senior living community. My mother was the youngest adult there, and was around her mid-30s. My brother, being too short to reach the peephole, doesn't move, only slightly reacts and looks at me. I get up off the computer chair and make my way to the front door to glance out the peephole. I see a man in a black ski mask staring at me through the peephole. It definitely didn't seem real. It sort of seemed like something from a cliché movie, as if he were dressed to rob a bank. I was immediately scared shitless, and I obviously didn't bother asking who it was. I silently stepped away, shut off the TV, grabbed my brother on our small black Pomeranian, and ran towards my bedroom. Once we were safely hidden in my closet, I informed him of what I saw outside. He didn't say much, but was visibly shaken, and just quietly stood there holding our little dog. I slid the tiny flip phone our mum lent us for emergencies from my pocket and dialed and I didn't think the man had left considering the knocks persisted after we left the living room. Yet somehow, she understood me and sent an officer over. Immediately after the call ended with the operator, I dialed for our mother. I explained everything to her, and she ended up leaving work early and came home around the time that the police had as well. I'm not sure what deterred him of pursuing further, but of course, the man was gone by the time they both had arrived. The officer was very clearly not taking any of it seriously, most likely thinking that these two young boys were just paranoid from staying home alone. It was probably just a young man playing a joke on a friend, they thought. However, like I stated before, we live in a senior living community. Who could he be possibly playing a joke on? His dear grandmother? He then gave my brother and I stickers, as if that would console our nerves after seeing some masked man pounding on our door. Fortunately, I never saw the stranger after that. However, after the experience, my house did get broken into, as well as my car 3 times. Thankfully, none of us were present when any of this took place, since my family and I moved out of the state and installed a security system. Nevertheless, I hope we never meet again. This story happened about a year ago, and it was pretty out there even for me. I was about 20 at the time that this occurred, and I am a female. So last year, I moved back in with my dad, after having lived out of state for some time. At the time, my stepmom, little half-sister, stepbrother, Jay, and his girlfriend, Cam, and her child, Leela, were also all living there too. My stepmom has a way of just letting people live in my dad's house, and my dad has no balls and doesn't say anything until something big happens, which it always inevitably does. So, not long after I moved in, my stepbrother was kicked out for illegal activity, but Cam and Leela stayed with us. I think, to my stepmom, Cam was this perfect person, and I don't really know. Just for a side note, Leela was Cam's daughter, but not my stepbrother's kid. No relation at all. Now Cam was about 18 at the time, and Leela was a little over 2. Cam and I became loose friends because we were living together, and I would help babysit Leela when Cam had to go to work. Eventually, we both got boyfriends. She started dating a guy she met at work, and I started dating someone who I knew from high school. I thought her new boyfriend was great, but the terms of him visiting were kind of weird. He was legitimately visiting his girlfriend, who was living in her ex-boyfriend's parents' house. Kinda weird, but whatever. So little by little, I start noticing that my stuff was disappearing. Small stuff at first, like socks or panties. Mainly thongs. The kind of stuff you just assume gets lost in the wash. But then my perfume started to go missing. Suddenly, jackets, dresses, shoes and jeans and bras were also missing. Now, sometimes I would find these things in her room, and other times, she would suddenly appear with them after I mentioned not being able to find something. On days, I would come home and find a large amount of stuff missing. Cam would make up wild stories about Jay breaking into our house when no one was home to steal girls' clothes. Yep, She tried to get me to believe that. Even went as far as bending out of a window screen and breaking the window lock to try and prove this. This honestly wasn't the most extreme thing Cam did to try and get me to believe her insane stories. Eventually, we got into a big argument because my brand new car had been messed with, and I basically accused Cam of going through my car and taking my stuff. Now, while Cam was younger, I was somewhat scared of her. I am very thin and petite, so I don't put up much of a fight. But Cam was taller and stronger, and had already struck me on occasions prior to this. So, in retrospect, any angry accusation was probably a bad idea, since it was just us and one of her friends home. Cam threatened to beat me senseless, among other colourful things, and I eventually backed off and left. Things went back to normal for a day or so, until one night, Cam literally freaked out, because her boyfriend was out of town, and I was hanging out with my own boyfriend, so she had nobody to give her attention. Now, when I say freak out, I mean Cam started claiming she was pregnant by her boyfriend in an attempt to make him come home. Problem was, Cam's boyfriend was going to school to be a doctor, and knew that since she was still recovering from a personal medical condition, it was literally impossible for her to be pregnant, especially not the amount of weeks she was trying to say she was. So he called me and had me search the house for a supposed pregnancy test, which is disgusting by the way, but I couldn't find one. So he confronted Cam over the phone about it, and she admitted that she was lying because she wanted him to come home. I'm going to add that he had been gone for less than 6 hours at this point, and that he was visiting family only a few hours away. So he told Cam he'd be back in a couple of days, and things seemed to settle down. Cam seemed to calm down, and I went to bed. Later that night, Cam's boyfriend called me again, going on about how Cam had called him, threatening to kill herself unless he came home right then and there, but that his car was messed up, and it was about 1 a.m, and nobody was going to give him a 2-hour ride back home right now. So I go into Cam's room, and she's laying on her bed in the dark, and she has a pill bottle in her hand. She's rambling about how she wants to die, and that she wants her boyfriend, and that if he doesn't come, she will just kill herself. And she doesn't care that Lila won't have a mother. Well, I freak out. Wake up my stepmom, who basically yells at Cam to throw up any of the pills she's taken and then goes back to bed. Great family, right? So yet again, Cam admits about lying about the pills, and was just hoping her boyfriend would come home to get her, as if he thought she was going to kill herself, he'd have to come then and there. Foolproof plan, right? Well, he didn't come, obviously. And Cam calls Jay to come pick her up and rides off with him, leaving Leela behind. I put Leela in my parents' room in her playpen, and then I left because I was done. But apparently, Jay dropped Cam back off later, and her boyfriend, who had finally gotten a ride into town, finds Cam cheating on him with Jay. They got into a fight, and then I guess Cam started with the whole suicide thing again. So her boyfriend called the police and had her Baker acted, which is basically when they lock up people threatening self-harm in a psych ward for 72 hours to get them to calm down. Alright, here is the point where it gets kind of crazy. So after Cam got Baker acted, myself and 2 friends went through Cam's room and found a lot of missing stuff from all of us hidden away, and sometimes even stuffed in Leela's diaper bags or toy boxes. One of the friends also warned me, and they went and showed me that Cam had mixed a tropical ingredient I was severely allergic to in my body wash, which could have hospitalized me for that kind of exposure. Cam had also peed in my shampoo and body spray, put blue dye in my toothpaste in an attempt to dye my mouth blue, and put green dye in my conditioner in an attempt to get me fired for having unnatural hair colour. Thankfully, I hadn't showered at home in 2 days, so none of it ever got used. The toothpaste I had noticed beforehand, and went ahead and replaced both that and my toothbrush without using it, which turned out to be a good thing because Cam had also supposedly thrown my toothbrush in the toilet. But here's the icing on the cake. Cam worked at a hospital and had somehow gotten her hands on one of those drinks that you empty into someone's cup, and then that goes on to empty their entire system, i.e. an extremely powerful laxative. I think it's one of the ones that they make you have just before a colonoscopy. She had planned to put it in my next drink, next time I left it out, just to make me really sick, because I accused her, rightfully so, of stealing my stuff. Cam also tried to tell people that my boyfriend was coming on to her and talking to her behind my back, which was a complete lie. The amount of charges I would have filed against this girl was insane, but I opted not to, because my dad and stepmom, while thinking it was serious, didn't think it would be morally right, since Cam was obviously not okay in the head. I was also pretty pissed that Cam's friends had waited until Cam had gotten locked up to tell me all about this stuff, and would have knowingly let me get sick and possibly die because of what Cam was tampering with. But if you think it ends there, you're wrong. The day before she got released from the psych ward, Cam had been calling me, and the same 2 friends were begging us to come and collect her on the day that she was getting released. However, we all agreed that it was not in our best interest to do so. So lo and behold, her release day comes and nobody shows up to collect her. I must have had 8 or 9 missed calls on my cell phone alone from her, and I have no idea just how many times she decided to ring the other girls. One of the other friends did text me though, and say that she had finally given in and called the psych ward, but by the time she called, they told her that Cam had apparently left with a random guy who had a family member in the psych ward. The friend also warned me that Cam was probably going to try and come to my house, which was the same friend who had been in on the tampering of my items and stealing of my stuff. So I was a little torn on whether or not to believe her, but I decided to go around the house, locking all the doors and windows and closing all the curtains and blinds. I seriously doubted she would be dumb enough to come to my house after my parents had called the psych ward and told them that she was no longer welcome at our address, and that, when she was released, they needed to make sure she went to her mother's house a few towns over, as we had already sent all of her stuff back to her mother. But still the same. I wanted the house to be secure since I was home alone. Well, either Cam didn't get the memo about not being allowed at my house, or she just got it but just didn't give a shit. It's about 10 o'clock in the morning, and I am sitting in the bathroom straightening my hair, when all of a sudden I hear someone legitimately pounding on the front door. It startled me so badly, I dropped my incredibly hot straightener on my foot. It wasn't just a one-time hit, and then it stopped. The pounding continued on without end, almost rhythmically. Now, my bathroom is on the other side of the house from the front door, so once I recovered from the initial shock, I flipped off the bathroom lights and ran into my bedroom. My theory was that if the house looked empty, maybe Cam would just give up and go back to her own home. My car was in the driveway, sure, but I often left my car behind to ride carpool with co-workers, or my boyfriend would pick me up to go out. It was probably naive of me to think that she would just give up, but you can't blame a girl for hoping. Well, pretty soon, Cam's pounding became relentless, and she started yelling as she was pounding. Being on the other side of the house, I couldn't make out most of what Cam was saying, but I was really hoping the doors held up to her fists. We had those stupid, mostly glass double doors at the front, and I was beginning to wonder if Cam was just considering breaking the glass in order to get in. So I frantically started texting my stepmom and dad, asking them what I should do. Of course, there is absolutely no reply, since they were both at work and were over an hour away from the house. So basically, I'm full on panicking, trying to decide if I should hide and wait it out or call the police. My boyfriend worked night shifts, so he was still asleep, and I felt completely and utterly alone. Like I had never felt so terrified all alone at once. The feeling was pretty indescribable. Well, after about 20 minutes of relentless pounding, it stops, and I think that perhaps Cam has given up. I started to stand up from where I had been crouched, when suddenly I heard my name being called. She started yelling, saying that she knew I was in there, and to open the bloody door, followed by another barrage of pounding. But this time, it was coming from my bedroom window. Cam was literally feet away from me, only separated by a thin glass window, which thankfully was covered by a very heavy curtain. I was already beginning to think that she would smash through that window, just because she assumed I was in there and had not replied to her at all. Cam then moved to the side of the house and tried the bathroom window, and then switched back to the front door in record time. She must have been running laps around the house in order to pull it off. This went on for another 20 minutes or so, and I was beginning to wonder if the windows were going to be able to manage her assault for much longer. Then suddenly it got really quiet. Her yelling turned into soft whining, like she was going to cry. She called my name again, asking for me to let her in. She said, "We were friends. I don't understand why you're doing this." She started to say something else, but then she started laughing an evil, sickening laugh, like she couldn't keep the act up anymore, and then fell completely silent. Taking advantage of the silence, I moved out into the kitchen so that I could have access to an escape route should I need one. You see, my kitchen is at the center of the house. From the kitchen, I could easily get to my garage door, to the front door, and the patio deck doors. Not only this, but I could easily get to what was once Cam's room, which also had a door to the patio deck in it. Now I didn't dare try running for my parents' room, as I would have had to pass the front doors in order to get there. But I was really wishing I could, because that's where all the guns were. Not that I would have shot Cam, but it would have been very nice to feel at least somewhat protected. Suddenly, the silence gave way to the loud slam of the back gate, and then I realized that Cam is now on the patio deck. I held my breath as Cam went and checked every door, including the one that went into her former bedroom. She actually spent a fair amount of time on this one, I guess hoping it would break loose or something, or maybe there was some trick to try and get it open that I didn't know about. But when that didn't work, Cam began screaming. She wasn't really saying anything, just yelling out sounds. It was honestly quite eerie, and I remember feeling like I was in some twisted horror movie. I hear our heavy metal patio furniture getting thrown around and the sound of glass shattering as one of the tables connected with the concrete. There were also a couple of splashes as the table and some of the chairs ended up in the pool. I thought for sure a chair was going to come flying through the sliding glass door at any minute. But then, as quickly as it had started, it stopped, and I heard the back gate slam shut. It had gotten silent again, until I heard a strange scratching sound. It took me a minute to realize what it was, but at that moment I realized Cam had begun to fiddle with the windows in the bathroom that was attached to her old bedroom. It was one of those foggy shower windows that are somewhat small and closer to the ceiling than your average window. In an instant, I realized Cam had probably dragged a chair to stand on it in order to reach the window. I knew it was locked though. I had made sure that window was locked. Hadn't I? I suddenly began to panic as I realized I couldn't remember if I had checked that window or not. Not to mention, Cam had already broken this lock once, so who's to say she couldn't have done it again? But I could still hear her huffing and yelling in frustration, so I was hoping she was struggling with it and wouldn't be able to break it a second time. I had now moved back and was cowered directly under the next door to the room that led into the garage. This one was the one place that was close to an exit, whilst also providing decent cover from every window. I felt safer, knowing she could not see me here, but also knowing that I had an escape route right there if I needed it. It had gotten quiet again, and I desperately, yet stupidly, hoped that this time Cam might have really given up. I pictured her huffing and stomping back to whoever was waiting for her and telling them to just drive her home to her mother's house. My stomach turned as I suddenly felt sick, as I realized she could have help. It would explain her getting around the house so fast and the ability to throw such heavy furniture. I had completely forgotten that there was some random guy out there with her. I began to feel even more scared than I had before, and the need to run for it. That he might be waiting out there somewhere to grab me, and I began to rethink my escape plan and started to think that perhaps hiding was better. All of this was interrupted when I heard the single most terrifying sound I had ever heard up till that point. You see, the handle on the door that led to what had formerly been Cam's room had gotten broken the night of her insanity, and you now had to fiddle with it to get it to open as the doorknobs didn't line up properly. And that was the sound I was hearing. Someone was shaking the doorknob, ever so softly and quietly, but forcefully. trying to get the door open. I strained my ears as Cam struggled with the doorknob before finally a small click. She succeeded in opening the door, and I realized with terror that I was now in the house with Cam, and I had no idea if she was armed or what she would do if she found me cowering in the corner by the door, or if she had that guy with her. In retrospect, I really had no idea on much of anything. Without waiting another second, I burst through the garage door while simultaneously slamming my hand on the button to raise the door. I tucked and rolled under the door before it had risen completely, scraping my knee in the process. And as I got to my feet, I saw a huge, beefy guy standing by a truck near the edge of the driveway, watching me. He began to take a step towards me, and I took off running. I sprinted between houses and up onto the golf course, where I was literally in the middle of all the golfers. Not that they gave two shits about a girl half-dressed crying. Once there, I called 911 and collapsed on the golf course as I waited for the police to show up. They came in without sirens and asked me to walk up to the gatehouse at the front of the neighborhood to meet me before they searched my house. As I walked up towards the gatehouse, I saw a truck driving out of the neighborhood, and the guy driving kind of tipped his head in my direction and sped up past the cops. It happened too fast for me to get a license plate number, and when I told the police, they sent a singular cop car after the guy. But as far as I know, with no license plate, name, or much of a description other than white male driving a white truck, they never caught the guy. Unfortunately, this is where it gets anticlimactic. My stepmom showed up, having read my texts but didn't respond. She flew in the neighborhood past me and the cops when she was soon followed by Jay. I was told they went in the house and found Cam ransacking my room while brandishing a kitchen knife. They calmed her down, and then my stepmom went outside. My boyfriend had showed up at this point, so he drove me back up to the house behind the police, who were still fully prepared to search. When the police strolled up to the driveway and to search the house, my stepmom made up some lie about how she had told Cam she was allowed to go to the house, that she'd forgotten to tell her about it, and that I had overreacted because of the way Cam acted the other night, and that I was prone to anxiety and being overdramatic, blah blah blah. It was all bullshit basically. It was all a lie. A crock of shit. I was furious, and have never wanted to hit my stepmom more than I wanted to that day. She basically made me look like a complete idiot to the cops. My stepmom had Jay take Cam to her mum's house, and the cops basically treated me like I was a waste of their time and the stupid kid that called the cops. They told me, with something like that, check with your family first before calling us next time, and left. As if I hadn't sent multiple texts to both my stepmom and dad. The cops around here aren't known for being amazing anyway, and they basically proved to me how incompetent they were that day. As for Cam, well, she got away with it all. She cyberstalked me for a while on Facebook and Instagram. Nothing threatening, but made sure she knew what I was up to, and made sure I knew that she knew. One day, about a month later, she actually did come back to the house to let my stepmom babysit Leela, and while she was in the house, she and her friends stole more of my shit, just to prove that she could, I suppose. Supposedly, she was telling people I didn't deserve the things I had, and that she didn't feel bad taking my stuff, because I had too much stuff that I didn't deserve. After that one though, my stepmom told her not to come to the house anymore, and cut off most contact with her. Recently, I heard Cam conned some guy into marrying her after dating her for about a month, and they moved across the country to be near his family. Ironically, they moved into a town literally 45 minutes from where my biological mother lives, so I guess there is a small chance I could see her again. But I haven't heard anything from her in almost a year. Her friends still live around here and occasionally say shit to me or try and stir up problems. But I recently moved in with my boyfriend, so Cam no longer knows where I live, and I've changed my phone number. I deleted all my social networks except for Reddit, but did take an extended leave from my account. And that is pretty much it. I really hope never to meet that psychopath again. I was a new nurse at our hospital and had only been working there for a couple of months. I had brought a patient of mine up from day surgery from the ER for an endoscopy, and they called me back down and asked me to bring up her family, as she didn't speak enough English to communicate and we needed her consent for a procedure. After dropping them off, I walked past the waiting room and headed back down the hall to the elevators. I took the way back to get to the ER, and all the hallways were deserted. You see, this used to be the pediatric wing of the hospital, but it has been shut down for years, and all the rooms are deserted, full of broken equipment, beds, and just general crap. As I reached the nurses' station at the T-junction, between the pediatric hallway and the hallway that goes down to the elevators, I saw a little girl standing across from the nurses' station further down the hall. She had big pigtails and was wearing a brown dress and white shoes, holding a teddy bear. I thought perhaps she was a family member who had walked away from the day surgery waiting room. I was concerned that she would go into one of these rooms and might get hurt or lost. So I said, "Hey little girl, what are you doing? You don't need to be over here. You're going to get hurt." And I walked around the nurse's station so that I could grab her hand and bring her back. I shit you not. As I got about 15 feet away from her, she vanished. Every hair on my body stood up straight, and I turned and ran like a bat out of hell to the elevator. I pounded that button for what seemed like an eternity, until the elevator got to the floor I was on. As I got back to the ER, I walked up to the nurse's desk, and one of the older nurses looked at me and said, "Geez, what's wrong with you?" I remember babbling like an idiot as I tried to tell them what happened. After listening to me for a moment or two, the nurse said, "Oh, you saw the little ghost girl? Yeah, she's been around here for years." And I remember replying, "Well, thanks for telling me about this before." Apparently the ghost has been here ever since the ER, ducking in and out of patients' rooms and peeking around curtains. My wife worked up on the 7th floor and said that one time on nights, a whole row of patients started yelling about a little girl that was running around in the rooms. I guess she gets around. I travel pretty regularly, so I don't struggle with anxiety nor anything about flying. I really quite enjoy it. That being said, Flight 72 from New York City to Istanbul in 2012 was easily the scariest experience of my life. We departed from JFK early evening. I wanted to say about 5 or 6, and it was a 10.5-hour flight. A couple of things as background. My plan was to eat the provided dinner, wait a little bit, take the sleeping pills I'd bought, and pass out. And hopefully, wake up an hour before landing and avoid all the monotony that goes along with long flights. The other thing to note was that this was not a nice plane. It looked old, it felt old, and rickety, and had that old plane smell. Okay, so everything was going to plan. We were about 3 to 4 hours into the flight. I'd eaten dinner, taken my pills, and was just starting to fade out, when I noticed 2 things. 1. The screens throughout the cabin that depicted the flight path and our current location were off. Last I looked, it had shown us ways off on the coast near the middle of the Atlantic, and it felt like we were periodically dropping altitude. It was odd, because it felt controlled, and it wasn't a big constant drop. Just every few minutes, you could sense that we were being lowered bit by bit, leveling off. This sort of piqued my interest enough to shake off the drowsiness that was coming on. But I wasn't really nervous at this point, just curious as to what was going on. I don't think many people on the plane had any idea about anything unusual. That wasn't until we heard over the intercom, "We need to make an unscheduled landing. Flight attendant, prepare the cabin." That got people's attention. Obviously, my first thought was, unscheduled landing? Where? We're in the middle of the Atlantic. I was sitting in the middle of the cabin in the 767 we're in, near where the flight attendant station is, and the jumper seats they sit in, so it was easy for me to lean over and try and chat with one of them. I asked if they had any more information, and knew where we were going to land or what was going on, to which the 2 flight attendants replied that they didn't have any more information than we did at that point. So this sort of quiet anxiety now exists within the cabin. People are chatting quietly between themselves, and everyone is looking around out the windows. It was a clear night, and we were over the Atlantic. All you could see was the ocean. Meanwhile, the screens are still dark, and we are continuing this sort of periodic descent. 10 minutes pass. The captain comes on, and essentially repeats the same message. Still no more information from the flight attendants, and this 10-minute pattern of repeating the same message and the weird descent, with still only the Atlantic to be seen out the window, goes on for another 50 minutes. I had no idea what to assume about all of this. Even the flight attendants seemed anxious, and I even specifically asked them if it was an emergency landing, if the plane was malfunctioning, and they wouldn't confirm or deny anything to me. Let me say here, the flight attendants were phenomenal this whole process, very patient and helpful, and they legitimately did not have the answers we were looking for, and did a wonderful job of keeping everyone calm. That being said, the pilot gets on the line and repeats the message and says we're making an emergency landing, this time sooner than the 10-minute pattern than before. At this point, we couldn't have been more than a few thousand feet above the Atlantic, as our descent had continued this whole time. I didn't have the perspective to see forward, obviously, but on both sides of the plane, all I could see was ocean. There was a palpable anxiety in the cabin, including myself. I always wondered how much that sleeping pill I took helped calm me down, with how high my adrenaline level was. It certainly wasn't helping me sleep at this point. We were getting closer and closer to the ocean, like we were going to land almost. My heart was thumping in my chest. I even got my phone out and was drafting a text to my wife to tell her that I loved her, on the small chance that it would somehow send. Not sure what I was thinking. At the very last moment though, nearing the ground, I see the small light of some fishing boat, and then some lights from land, as then we touched down, on land. Everyone clapped and yelled in joy, and let out a huge corporate sigh of relief. The pilot got on, and says that there was a malfunction with the plane, and that we had made an emergency landing in Newfoundland in a tiny island called Stevensville. I came to find out later that there had been an electrical malfunction in the cockpit, and that the instrumentation for the pilot was either inaccurate or not on at all, but that he was essentially flying the plane with very limited instrumentation, essentially manual or flying blind. This explains the weird descent pattern that he was doing, bit by bit, as they tried to figure out where to land. The malfunction happened over the Atlantic, and he had the choice between trying to make it to Iceland or turning back and trying Newfoundland, and choosing the latter. I learned that generally they try to plan flight paths across the Atlantic in a sort of arc in case of situations like this, so the pilot has options. In this case, I'm certainly glad he did. I had a chance to talk to the pilot later on in the evening, but he wouldn't go into much detail about what happened, but I assumed he would have just told me that this was a routine kind of thing. A seasoned pilot probably saved a lot of lives that day, including mine. Beyond all that, what happened over the next 8 to 10 hours is another crazy story. But still, that time with those crazy descents was some of the worst and most terrifying times of my life, and I'm so glad I made it out alive. During one of my visits to Hawaii, I stayed with my aunt and cousins. They lived in an apartment right across the street from Puahu School, Honolulu. On this particular morning, the family left home in the morning, and I decided to stay at the apartment to clean and do laundry. I had finished cleaning and was preparing to head to the laundry room when I realized I didn't have enough quarters to run the washer/dryer machines. I assumed there would be a coin exchange machine at the laundry room and headed out. I also didn't have keys to the apartment unit, so I left the door unlocked. If I'm remembering this correctly, my aunt lived on the 4th floor, and the laundry room was located on the 2nd floor. Typically, the apartment was pretty quiet. It was rare to meet anyone in the hallways or on the elevator. Anyway, I get to the laundry room and survey the area, only to realize that there aren't any coin exchange machines. I decide to ask one of the other tenants for change. I walk out of the laundry room and knock on the door right across the hallway, and an older man comes to the door. I explain the situation to him, but he doesn't have enough quarters. I thank him and then knock on the door to the right of the laundry room entrance, hoping that they have enough quarters for me to finally get some laundry done. Another older lady, maybe in her 60s, opens the door. She has long brown and grey hair, and this is where it started to get weird. I notice the interior of her home is very dark, and I can't see much beyond the couch. She comes across as very friendly, and more importantly, she has quarters, which probably had a lot to do with why I perceived her as friendly. I hand her my dollars, and she asks me to hold on a minute before heading back inside. She takes about a minute, but comes back to the door and hands me the requested quarters. As she's counting off the quarters onto my hand, a man suddenly comes next to the door, positioning himself next to her. He seems to be her son, maybe in his late 20s or early 30s, but interestingly, displays childlike mannerisms in the way he stands and stares at me. He has a full moustache of dark brown hair and is definitely a fully grown man. He kind of looks like he could be one of the members of the Beatles. He stands about 5 feet 10 inches. He's not wearing pants. He's wearing an oversized collared golfing shirt with horizontal stripes in black and brown and blue. The shirt drops low enough, covering his crotch. Not that I was trying to look, but it was still a little disturbing. Did I mention he's not wearing pants? The kind lady seems to be embarrassed that he's come to the door and gestures to him, almost like she wants to shoo him away. To my discomfort, he sticks around even with the stern shooing and continues to stare at the quarters and then back to me, making me feel just a bit uncomfortable. To my relief, this awkward exchange ends and she shuts the door. I get the washing machine running. It's now been 30 minutes or so since my encounter with the kind lady and her lightly cladded son, and I'm moving the washed clothing into the dryers. The dryer door opens towards the laundry room entrance and gets in my way of seeing in that direction for a while. But soon enough, I catch a glimpse of a person standing at the doorway in my peripheral vision. Something to note. There is only one way to enter and exit this laundry room. I look, and it's the lightly cladded son, standing sort of sheepishly in the doorway, with him outside in the brightly lit hallway. I can see his silhouette in full view. He's very thin. He just stands there staring at me once again. This situation makes me pretty or extremely uncomfortable, but at the same time, I'm still unsure of how to react. I don't want to be rude to the son of the lady who had just kindly helped me, if there is no real threat, as he hasn't really done anything legally wrong. Granted, the no pants situation is a bit borderline. So I just continue to work on my laundry, making sure to keep my side vision on him. Soon after, though, I look up again, and he's gone. Relieved, I begin packing up the laundry detergent and basket. But then, he returns. This time, though, he's taken his shirt off. Under his shirt, he's only got on a diaper. Although I'm still not sure for the motive of the visit, it's now become clear that I need to get out of there fast. And this probably crosses the line into the territory of legal wrongdoing now. Public indecency, perhaps. For a split second, I juggle in my head whether I would be able to physically outdo this guy if he tried to stop me from exiting the laundry room. He's thin, but I don't feel confident. He kind of lingers at the doorway of the laundry room for a minute. I put the laundry basket down slowly, keeping my eyes on him. I say, "Hi, can I help you?" in my loudest but calm voice, hoping some neighbors would hear, but there is no one around. Meanwhile, keeping my eyes locked with his, keeping a stern and serious face, I'm hoping this will convey to him that I am not interested in whatever he is trying to do. He doesn't respond. Then he starts to walk in my direction, slowly, swaying from side to side, and he starts to do this weird thing with his hands. He's using both of his thumbs to tug lightly at the top of his diaper outwards, as if to start pulling it off. He keeps doing this. I'm horrified at the thought that he might take the thing off, and he's grinning. I get a terrible feeling in my stomach, and I feel sweat on my back. I no longer feel bad raising my voice at him. I say very loudly, trying to sound authoritative, to go back home now, and get out of here now. He doesn't seem to comprehend, or just doesn't want to cooperate, but he looks irritated now.
I remember his childlike mannerisms and wonder if threatening to tell on his mum might work to ward him off. I feel kind of silly saying this as an adult. I said it a lot back when I was a kid, but I started to say very loudly again, "I'm going to tell your mum. Go back home." This seems to work. He's no longer grinning, and he starts walking backwards. After a few hesitant glances, he leaves the laundry room. Somehow, it worked. After I make sure I heard him get back into his apartment, I grab the laundry basket and frantically run to the elevator, as I'm not taking the stairs in case my life depends on it. When I get back to the apartment, I lock the doors and check the rooms to make sure that no unwanted visitors have come into the apartment during my absence. It feels kind of silly expressing this now, but at the time, the threat felt real. Thankfully, my aunt has since moved to another apartment, so chances of meeting the adult diaper-wearing exhibitionist again are pretty slim. After the encounter, I feel both bad for him, in case it's mental condition that caused him to behave in such a way, and upset at him or his caretaker, since he probably should have been more closely attended to. I had texted my cousins before I headed to the laundry room to ask if they had any special care instructions for their clothes. One of them responds finally, after my aforementioned ordeal, asking me to please hang dry one of his pants, as opposed to throwing them in the drying machine. My stomach sinks again, just at the thought of confronting that diaper man, but the thought of wanting to get the job done right overpowers my judgment. I prepare for this trip this time though, by equipping myself with a proper defense tool, a chemical spray bottle I find underneath the bathroom sink. I creep quietly all the way to the laundry room and successfully bring back my cousin's pants, all the while looking over my shoulders every few seconds. In hindsight, I probably shouldn't have risked taking this second trip, although nothing happened. The spray, I later discover, is for a stain-removing chemical, with the capacity to only softly gush out bubbles. I described the incident to my cousins, asking if they had seen him around the apartment or laundry rooms before. They don't seem to recognize the description of the man nor his mum. This makes me think that perhaps this guy has seldom ventured out from his dark apartment alone.